Chapter 1391. I don't need any of it. No, Meng Hao was trembling as tears of anguish rolled down his cheeks. His world was crumbling. This was the second time he had experienced the pain of a father passing away. The first time had been with Qi Yunhai, and now it was with his true father, Fang Ziyufeng. Memories from his childhood rose up in his mind. How his father had slaughtered Fang clan cultivators to protect him, and how he had agreed to be stranded on planet South Heaven for 100,000 years for him. He remembered reuniting with his parents, and the look in his father's eyes as he passed on his sword technique, simultaneously cowing all of South Heaven. He remembered his father's quiet encouragement when he had finally left planet South Heaven. He remembered how tall and strong his father seemed, like a mountain in his heart. He remembered how, after becoming the crown prince of the Fang clan, he had taken the whole clan to pay respects, and the tears of pride which had glistened in his father's eyes. He remembered how, after his cultivation base had reached towering heights and the war had broken out, his father had looked at him with such awe and reverence. Back then, he didn't understand that and had even felt hurt and alone, but he had buried those feelings and focused on being strong. Now, in that single look that his father gave him, Meng Hao realized that it had all been done intentionally by his father. He realized that his father chose to die because, at this critical and deadly crossroads in the war, he didn't want to become a hindrance to his son. He hoped that his own death would give Meng Hao a chance to survive. His love for his son was clear and profoundly deep. Everything he did was for his son, for Meng Hao. A father is often stern and doesn't express his love for his children, but when the critical moment arrives, he will sacrifice himself, even if all that gives them is a bit more time to flee for their lives. Meng Hao was trembling and his hands were clenched tightly into fists. His heart was broken, and as his tears spilled down his face, they began to turn red. A strange sound began to echo in his throat, and it was hard to tell whether it was weeping or laughter, despair or rage. Off in the distance, Fang Wei's head flew off of his shoulders as he was decapitated. In the moment before he was killed, his glaring eyes seemed to shout, "I am Fang Wei, I will defend the Fang clan." Countless members of the Fang clan wept with madness as they fought. One after another self-detonated, using that power to batter at the outsiders. Fang Yu was attacking like mad just as everyone else was. Sun Hai was by her side. She was the true love of his life, and he would protect her even if he died doing so. Shielding her with his body, they slaughtered their way into the outsiders. Meng Hao's mother was standing there in a daze, her hand extended as if she were trying to grab hold of something. However, there was nothing there. She watched as her husband transformed into a blazing inferno, then into ash, taking numerous outsiders with him into death. Trembling, she smiled. It was a poignant smile, a soft smile, and at the same time her eyes filled with both understanding and determination. "When we got married, you said that we would live together and die together. During Meng Hao's 7th-year tribulation, you said that together we would defy fate. That night you went, sword in hand, to cut down the vile clan members who persecuted Hayar. You thought that I wasn't watching, but I was. You returned, soaked in blood, and wept softly as you looked over Hayar as he slept. In the Tower of Tang, you stopped me from going to save him, but I knew that at the same time, your heart was breaking. You were struggling just like I was, and I knew because when you held my hand, your hand was shaking even harder than mine. When Hayar brought the clan to pay respects, you put on a casual front, but I know that you were more excited and proud than you had ever been. When you were brought Sun Hai to meet us, I know that you had already run a thorough investigation on him. You wholeheartedly approved of your son-in-law, because you realized how sincere his feelings were for you. To ensure that everyone revered and respected Hayar, you had to pretend that you were awestruck. I know that you did that, for Hayar. You aren't the type of person who is good at expressing himself, but I know that you love Hayar and you are just as much as I do. We were married on planet East Victory and sent to stand guard on planet South Heaven. We spent many years together, but today, you've gone. And I'll go with you, because I remember that oath we made on the day we were married. We live together, and we die together." Even as the booms echoed out on the battlefield, Meng Li turned to look at Meng Hao and Fang Yu, and she smiled. She was loath to part with them, but she understood the meaning of Fang Ziyufeng's death, and so she began to walk out onto the battlefield. "Hayar, you or flee from this place. It doesn't matter how, get away, flee and live." Meng Hao trembled as he watched his mother walk out into the outsider army. As they swept over her, a sudden explosion ripped through their ranks. Blue veins popped out on Meng Hao's face and neck. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was shaking so hard that wisps of smoke began to rise up from his head. "Dad, Mom," tears flowed down his face. He wanted to cry and at the same time to laugh. He wanted to howl in anguish and roar in rage. However, all the sounds were stuck in his throat. In that moment, Meng Hao's world seemed to stop moving. His blood ceased flowing. Everything went still. The only sound that could be heard was the beating of his heart, which pounded like thunder. It filled his mind as if it wished to burst out from within him, to sweep through the starry sky and put an end to everything. Suddenly, the cold voice of the female paragon echoed out. "This planet will be destroyed. That man who just died was your father, and that woman who died with him was your mother. How amusing." Her words were like a key that unlocked the cage within which Meng Hao had been festering. He suddenly began to laugh, a laughter filled with misery, dementia, and defiance. "Gone? Are they really gone? You people should die. You shall die. You must die." As Meng Hao laughed, tears of blood streamed down his face. He was shaking harder than ever now, and at the same time a terrifying aura erupted out of him. When the female paragon heard his laughter, she shivered uncontrollably, and her heart seized. For some reason, she even felt a bit frightened. When the large-headed cultivator heard Meng Hao's laughter, his pupils constricted. Meng Hao slowly looked up, his eyes shining with grief as he looked out across the battlefield. "You want to corrupt my Tao, you want to defile my blood, you want to befoul my soul. I was fighting back before. I didn't want that defilement, but now I think maybe that was a mistake. Who cares about a bit of befoulment?" Eyes shining with coldness and insanity, he embraced the grief, and suddenly the look in his eyes transformed into something bizarrely shocking. "Who cares about some defilement? I don't need my Tao, I don't need my blood, I don't need my soul, I only need to kill you people." Even as the words left his mouth, it was without the slightest hesitation that he stopped fighting back against the corruption and defilement within his blood. In the blink of an eye, he began to shake as the power of the curse transformed his blood, stained his soul, washed over his bones, and besmirched his Tao foundation. All of a sudden, the aura which erupted from within him was no longer that of the immortal realm or the ancient realm. Instead, it was some type of fusion, an indescribable, unspeakable aura. It was a multifarious aura. Moments ago, it had been completely ordinary, but now it was almost diabolical. Before, it was pure and clean, but now it was corrupt and defiled. Black veins spread out across his face, and then his entire body. His hair grew incredibly long, and shrill laughter rang out as he stood there shaking. As the laughter filled the air, he shattered his Tao foundation and his immortal meridians. The surrounding outsiders were completely and utterly shocked. They could sense something terrifying within Meng Hao, something that was neither immortal, god, nor devil. It was like a mutation. A shocking aura which had mutated out from an immortal. You, the female paragon said with a gasp. She seemed astonished, even incredulous. She was sure that her corruption magic shouldn't do anything like this. After unleashing it, the victim should have turned into a pool of defiled blood, but now, although Meng Hao clearly was being corrupted, he wasn't dying but instead was undergoing some strange transmogrification. How could this be? She thought. Her scalp was tingling from the bizarre, indescribable sensation she was now getting from Meng Hao. It was almost as if heaven and earth were being affected, as if the starry sky were being influenced. All immortals, all gods, all cultivators, everything in existence could sense the incredible pressure coming from Meng Hao. What is that?" The large-headed cultivator's eyes went wide, and he began to pant as he started at Meng Hao, his mind reeling. Rumbling could be heard as Meng Hao slowly looked up. His eyes were now bright red, not from being bloodshot, but because, in his pain and anguish, they had actually turned crimson. They were like gemstones, but if you looked at them long enough, they seemed like seas of blood. He had bright red eyes, skin covered with black veins, and long pitch-black hair. As he stood there, all creation seemed to be trembling, and ripples were surging out through the starry sky. At the same time, a sensation of utter terror began to rise up in the hearts of the outsiders. It was as if some sinister and mysterious pressure had suddenly begun to radiate out from Meng Hao. "The only person who knows what choice I made back then," he murmured, "is me." With that, he waved his hand, and his soul lamps suddenly appeared. They were different than before. These soul lamps burned with a mysterious blue-violet flame. The blue-violet fire made no noise as it burned, and yet the entire starry sky shook. Both on planet South Heaven and outside of it, outsiders and cultivators alike, Everyone, even the paragons, even Shui Dongliu, felt a terrifying sensation. Chapter 1392, Happy Now. There was a devil, and there was a god who was half of an immortal. Furthermore, there ought to have been a true immortal. The paragon immortal realm was to be the birthplace of that immortal. Apparently, it had been foreordained that at some point in history, the immortal would open his eyes and stride forth to reach the ultimate peak of existence. The immortal was above the god and could suppress the devil. That was the legend which was spoken of. However, the truth was, what was being produced by the paragon immortal realm right now was not the immortal. It was the demon. The mountains and seas were the birthplace, and all the resources of heaven and earth were called upon to instigate this change with the immortal. He had watched his family self-detonate, and the starry sky shook. Amidst laughter and tears, the immortal became the demon. The demon, murmured Shui Dongliu, looking in the direction of planet South Heaven. Now the Aeon span has its demonic chi. 1. The Aeon here has actually been mentioned many times in the story, but was translated differently. It comes from the demon sealing mantra, which is very obscure and vague in Chinese, and involved a lot of guessing to translate. Back when I first worked on the mantra, this chapter hadn't even been released in Chinese, and of course, back then I had no access to Urjin in any case. Now that the term has shown up in this context, a lot of puzzle pieces can probably be put together, and I've finally gone back to all the old chapters to change some things and make sure everything syncs right. The word Aeon itself could also be translated as kalpa, a term fans of IET might be familiar with. To quote from Wikipedia, a kalpa Aeon is, generally speaking, the period of time between the creation and recreation of a world or universe. Of further note is the fact that within that mantra was a character that was hard to interpret at the time I originally translated it, but becomes clear in the context of later events. The newest version reflects that change, and is pretty relevant. Unfortunately, the full meaning of the Aeon and the Aeon span will not be explained until later. At that time I will include another footnote with further reminders. If you want to go back to previous chapters to see how I've changed things, and then guess what it all means, here is your hit list. The first time the mantra was seen in action was chapter 95. A variation came up in chapter 407. Finally, the Aeon span was actually mentioned already once in the story in chapter 1306, which I've since updated to reflect this more correct version of the translation. All other times the demon sealing mantra came up, it was a direct quote of the original version, or the original and alternate versions. However, if you want to check those references for context, they are chapters 89, 101, 406, 407, 495, 497, 882. Please note that sometimes when I go back to make these changes to the old chapters, I tend to miss a passage here or there, or even create new typos, etc. If you notice something like that, I would very much appreciate it if you would report it in the thread for mistakes and typos. I do check the comments here in the chapter, but sometimes comments skip my notice, and I would hate for a mistake to go noticed but unfixed. The chaotic aura radiating off of Meng Hao could most rightly be described as demonic chi, because the immortal had transformed it was demonic chi. As of this moment, demonic chi raged beyond control. Now, are you happy? Meng Hao said, laughing a laughter that seemed like weeping. It was filled with something bizarre and subversive, and a towering rage that shook everything in the heavens. Fear gripped the hearts of the outsiders, and as for the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm, their hearts welled up with grief and sorrow. Now, are you at ease? Meng Hao waved his sleeve, and everything in heaven and earth trembled as his energy rocketed up. As Meng Hao began to stride forward, his bizarre laughter contained an indescribable multifariousness, a madness, a coldness, the epitome of all contradiction. Even as he took his first step forward, several of his soul lamps winked out, and the third desolation began, the desolation of the soul. Normally speaking, the desolation of the soul was a tribulation that would be extremely difficult for ancient realm cultivators. However, Meng Hao's soul had already been defiled, so to him, this desolation counted for little. Both life and death were simply different types of transformations. The desolation of the soul was gone in an instant. Of his 33 soul lamps, only 18 were still lit. Originally, the smoke that came up from the soul lamps upon being extinguished should have been green, but now it was black. As the smoke shot toward Meng Hao, he absorbed it, and his hair grew even longer than before. More black veins snaked out across his skin. His eyes were bright, and he looked even more bizarrely demonic than before. As he stepped forth, he spoke, voice soft. If you people are happy now, at ease, then that means it's time for me to be happy and at ease. It's time for all of you to die. As the female paragon hovered there, her pupils constricted with astonishment. She began to back up, and at the same time, hit her hand down onto the top of her head. Instantly, a swath of mist appeared above her, which transformed into a bell. The bell tolled, causing vibrations to spread out in all directions. Next, the female paragon lifted her hand up to strike the top of her head again, but before her hand could fall, Meng Hao's laughter filled her ears. It was like the sound of crying, filled with incredible bizarreness. Hitting yourself, let me help. Even as the words left his mouth, Meng Hao shot toward the female paragon. The large-headed cultivator's heart began to pound. Gritting his teeth, he shot toward Meng Hao to intercept him, unleashing a fist strike. However, Meng Hao's body distorted and unexpectedly. He passed right through the large-headed cultivator, as if he didn't even exist. Completely ignoring him, he bore down on the female paragon. No, she screamed, her eyes widening. Meng Hao's right hand then lifted up as he prepared to do exactly as he had said and hit her head. When he struck her, a boom echoed out and the female paragon's head actually exploded. Blood, brain matter, and rotten filth exploded out in all directions. And yet, Meng Hao didn't stop hitting. I noticed that you hit yourself a few times. Allow me to help hit you a few more times. He continued to strike her again and again and again. Her body was collapsing, and she was dead, but he kept smashing his palm down over and over again, crying and laughing at the same time. Booms filled the air, and everyone watched as the female paragon's body was beaten into a bloody pulp by Meng Hao. Gasps rang out. Her screaming soul flew out from her destroyed body, but before she could escape, Meng Hao's hand shot out to grab her. She had already managed to put some distance between the two of them, but it was almost as if Meng Hao controlled all of heaven and earth, and his hand instantly closed around her. "Do you really dare to kill me?" she screamed, clearly terrified. Meng Hao looked at her with a bizarrely demonic smile that seemed to contain infinite weeping. "No, I don't," he said softly. Then, as all of the outsiders watched, as the large-headed cultivator and the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm looked on, Meng Hao took the female paragon's soul and popped it into his mouth. Simultaneously crying and laughing, he began to chew. He chomped down viciously over and over again as he ate her soul. Her blood-curdling screams echoed out clear for everyone to hear, and they were left trembling. The members of the Fang clan stood there quietly. Fatty and Meng Hao's other friends, as well as his sister, watched with sadness in their eyes. This Meng Hao seemed like a complete stranger to them, and yet they knew why he had changed in such a way. The only person who didn't have such a look in her eyes was Su Qing. Her expression was one of staunch determination. She was not shaken at all. Meng Hao looked around, chuckling and whimpering, his expression enough to strike astonishment into the hearts of all onlookers. Then he turned his gaze towards Su Qing and said, "Want some? It's yummy." Su Qing didn't hesitate for a moment before nodding. "If you are the immortal, I will ascend with you. If you become the devil, I will become bedeviled with you. If you become the demon, I will transmigrate with you." Meng Hao looked at Su Qing and laughed. It was hard to tell what he was thinking as he did, but tears could be seen in his eyes. However, those tears didn't spill. Not a drop fell down. The surrounding outsiders were trembling, and without even thinking about it, they began to back up. The large-headed cultivator's heart was pounding, and just as he was preparing to flee, Meng Hao suddenly turned to look at him. "And what about you? Why were you helping her? I can tell that you have a powerful karma thread attached to you. It's too bad it's so faint. It's also too bad that you chose to come looking for death." As he spoke those last words, Meng Hao's face twisted viciously. A moment ago, his expression had been a mixture of laughing and crying, but now it was distorted in rage. He looked purely fiendish as a black fog suddenly erupted out from inside of him. Then he shot toward the large-headed cultivator. The large-headed cultivator's scalp tingled as he fell back as fast as he could. However, he couldn't match Meng Hao in terms of speed. In the blink of an eye, Meng Hao had overtaken him, and they were both surrounded by black fog. Screams echoed out, along with Meng Hao's bizarre weeping laughter. Occasional booms could be heard, which caused all hearts to tremble. It was impossible to tell what was happening inside of the black fog. Not even Shui Dongliu could see through it. The rest of the battlefield was dead silent. All eyes were fixed upon the black fog. Soon, a figure barreled out. It was the large-headed cultivator. His eyes had been ripped out of their sockets and one still dangled there, swinging back and forth. His ears had been torn off and he was covered with wounds. Most shocking of all was that a gaping bite mark could be seen on his neck, which spurted with blood. His face was twisted with fear, and he screamed as he fled. Apparently, whatever had happened inside that fog left him completely and utterly shaken. Everyone looked on at what was happening, completely flabbergasted. Finally, Meng Hao emerged from the fog. He appeared to be injured and blood was seeping down his chin. However, his laughter and weeping continued to echo out. He spit out a mouthful of blood, and his eyes seemed to glow even redder than before. Chuckling and whimpering, he said, "I can't actually beat you now, but if you get close enough, I will eat you." When the fleeing large-headed cultivator heard his words, he shivered, clearly scared out of his mind. "And then we get to you people," Meng Hao said, turning his head toward the outsiders surrounding planet South Heaven. They were all trembling, and it was hard to say who did it first, but they all began to flee. All of the outsiders near planet South Heaven took to flight, surging away from the planet like a receding tide. Meng Hao's weeping laughter filled the air as he shot toward the retreating army. Instantly, screams began to rise up as countless outsiders met their end. Those who were far away, he killed. Those who were near, he ate. Blood spread out everywhere, and the gruesome sight of the battlefield filled the outsiders with such extreme terror that they fled en masse. One single person drove an army of millions of outsiders away from planet South Heaven. Meng Hao's clothes were drenched in blood, and the most piercing sound on the entire battlefield was his weeping laughter. His aura was bizarre and multifarious, and it left Paragon C Dream and everyone else completely rattled. As for the rest of the army of outsiders around the Ninth Mountain, the ones who hadn't attacked planet South Heaven, they were looking at Meng Hao with astonishment and terror. "A lunatic, he's completely insane. His dad and mom died, his clan members were killed, and it drove him crazy. What is he? The demon. Is he the legendary entity that supposedly could be born out of the perversion of the Paragon Immortal Realm? The demon. Damn it, this is the demon that the Immortal God Realm and the Devil Realm were hoping would appear when they changed things. They're going to be sorry." As the outsiders trembled, the Eight Essences male Paragon looked at Meng Hao, and an incredible coldness rose up within him. Even Dao Fang was panting as he stared at Meng Hao. He had to admit that, as of this moment, Meng Hao's energy was completely astonishing. "One person can't win a war," Meng Hao said, "but you people have pushed things too far." Laughing and crying, his hair whipping about him, looking more bizarre than ever, he bared his teeth and looked at Dao Fang and the Eight Essences Paragon. "I can't beat you people now, but what I can do is eat you." With that, he took a step forward, looking more bizarrely demonic than ever. Chapter 1393, Guilty because of the Fang Clan. "Who told you to provoke me? Does this make you happy? Are you at ease now?" Meng Hao's strange voice echoed out across the battlefield, causing all outsiders to tremble. Even the most powerful experts were shocked. "Parlor tricks," snorted the Eight Essences Paragon, suddenly advancing toward Meng Hao. Paragon C Dream was about to try to intercept him when, to her shock, the Paragon puppet held out its hand to block her path. C Dream gaped as she looked at the Paragon puppet, to confirm that its eyes really were those of Meng Hao. At the same time, the large-headed cultivator was shaking as he fled, trailing black fog. However, he was far enough from the battlefield, and people were so focused on Meng Hao that nobody was paying any attention to him anymore. As the Eight Essences Paragon closed in on Meng Hao, the power of all his essences erupted out. However, in almost the exact same instant, Meng Hao clenched his fist, and suddenly his aura changed. No longer was he laughing and crying. Instead, he seemed completely and utterly domineering. That domineering air placed him as the most important entity in existence. As he unleashed his fist strike, it was as if the vast expanse itself would bow to his energy. As they closed in on each other, Meng Hao's energy erupted as he unleashed one god-slaying fist after another, after another. He threw his head back and roared, taking 7 steps and unleashing a punch with each step. It was none other than the 7 god steps, which caused his energy to rocket up, until he took his 7th step and unleashed his 7th punch, whereupon his domineering air spiked. It was as if he had superseded the starry sky, become the center of all attention, as if he were so utterly mad that he would kill his opponent even if he died in the process. This was in such sharp contrast to the previous laughing and crying that the Eight Essences Paragon could never have predicted that something like this would happen. In the blink of an eye, the two met and began to fight. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth as his aura changed once again. It was no longer domineering, it was now murderous. Apparently, he was completely oblivious to his injuries, like a wild animal who didn't even care if his body collapsed. He pounced toward the Eight Essences paragon with shocking speed, mouth gaping as he attempted to take a bite out of the man's head. The paragon was astounded and fell back immediately, but Meng Hao's mouth still landed on his arm, and a huge chunk of flesh was ripped off. Meng Hao then turned to look at him, his eyes red, his hair flying about, and he looked like nothing more than a rabid beast. "You," the paragon said, heart thumping. Meng Hao began to chortle as he leapt forth and attacked yet again, ignoring any injuries and ignoring any possibility of dying. He seemed completely and utterly insane, his eyes shining with brutal ferocity, totally oblivious to life and death, completely willing to end in mutual destruction. The paragon was deeply alarmed. "Insane," he cried, backing up. "You're completely insane." However, Meng Hao's aura then changed again. A pure, righteous, and noble immortal qi erupted from within him. However, he still looked just as ferocious as before, like a fierce beast, and when an immortal is enraged, the heavens collapse and earth is shattered. Meng Hao stood there in grand fashion, immortal qi flowing around him, essence power swirling as he performed an incantation gesture and unleashed numerous magical techniques. Mountains descended, the Paragon Bridge crushed down, and a windstorm screamed, transforming into lightning. Magical techniques flew out at high speed, making him almost like a sea of magic as he charged toward the Paragon. The lightning cauldron even appeared, and after performing a teleportation, an azure rock slashed at the Paragon from behind in a vicious attack. The man's face fell, and just when he was about to counterattack, Meng Hao suddenly loosened his fist, allowing the man to strike him. His right arm exploded into a cloud of gore, and half of his body was destroyed, and yet he accomplished his goal of getting close to the Paragon. Chuckling and whimpering, he ferociously bit down onto the Paragon's throat and ripped the flesh out. The man screamed miserably, flinging Meng Hao away from him and shooting backward, simultaneously clasping his hand down over the wound on his throat. He wanted to speak, to say something, but the sound wouldn't come out. As of this moment, his expression was one of complete stupefaction and terror. It was rare for him to find an enemy on the battlefield who he truly feared, but as of this moment, he was terrified of Meng Hao. That was even more so the case when Meng Hao licked his lips and began to close in on him again. The man's scalp was tingling so hard it felt like it might explode, and he suddenly recalled what Meng Hao had said only moments ago. "I can't beat you people now, but what I can do is eat you." What is he, damn it? He thought. The immortal god realm and the devil realm induced a change in the immortal, but what exactly appeared in its place? He's even more terrifying than the immortal. He stared at Meng Hao, raging inwardly, and was just about to fall back when suddenly, his face flickered. He looked down at some of his wounds and noticed that they were black, and that the blackness was spreading. "A curse," he exclaimed, face flickering. "No, not a curse. That's just my hatred." Meng Hao chuckled, whimpered, and then charged forward. The Paragon's face turned grim, and he let out an enraged shout as his body began to wither. At the same time, his nascent divinity emerged, leaving his body behind and fleeing, unwilling to have any further contact with Meng Hao. "Insane," he cried. "You're completely insane." Laughing at the sight of the fleeing Paragon, Meng Hao turned to look at Dao Fang and said, "Don't get near me." Dao Fang shivered and began to back up, his scalp numb. If Meng Hao's cultivation base were significantly weaker than theirs, it wouldn't be so frightening, but he was clearly just a hair below them. All of the bizarre multifariousness and the pressure weighing down from his aura made it difficult for them to unleash their full potential. Most importantly, they simply weren't as vicious as Meng Hao. He was so insane that he didn't even care if he died, as long as he could bite down on some flesh and blood. Dao Fang couldn't shake the scene of the terrifying look on the face of the female Paragon's soul as it was devoured. He suddenly had the feeling that the immortal god realm and the devil realm had made a mistake. Perhaps the true immortal possessed power that placed it above the god, a power that could suppress the devil, but it was still possible to defeat that immortal in battle. In contrast, this demon, despite having just been born, despite not being strong enough yet to throw the vast expanse into chaos, had already shown how potentially terrifying he was. That was even more so when Meng Hao's arm began to regrow in front of all eyes and rapidly reappeared like new. That left Dao Fang completely shaken. As of this moment, the Paragons were fleeing the battlefield, the large-headed cultivator was fleeing, and the army was also fleeing. All of that was because of the sudden transformation, the sudden birth of the demon. Meng Hao technically wasn't very powerful at the moment, but for all intents and purposes, he might as well be. His laughter drifted out, becoming crying, and he trembled. In the madness of that laughter, he seemed to be laughing at himself and crying for his relatives. Everyone who heard it sank into silence, outsiders, mountain and sea cultivators, and Shui Dongliu alike. Meng Hao, Fang Yu said, trembling in Sun Hai's arms. She looked at her little brother, at Meng Hao, and her heart twinged with pain. Their parents were gone, and Meng Hao was now her only blood relative. Fatty wept as he looked at Meng Hao. He wanted to say something, but wasn't sure what. All he knew was that looking at Meng Hao like this filled him with pain. Then there was Chen Fan, and Meng Hao's master Pill Demon, and further off in the distance Qi Jiusi, who had a torn look in his eyes. Everyone who was still alive on planet South Heaven was watching Meng Hao. They saw his demonic qi, they saw how terrifying he was, and they saw that laughing, crying expression. Shui Dongliu, maybe you're really 9 seals and maybe you are. Whoever you are, your machinations swept up me, my grandpa Meng, my grandpa Fang, and my parents. The mountain and sea realm is in ruins, and planet South Heaven is virtually destroyed. I have become the demon. Presumably, the time has come to carry out your final plan. Meng Hao looked up into the starry sky, his voice resonating oddly as he gazed at the heavens. The starry sky trembled as Shui Dongliu appeared. In another direction, Dao Fang and the 8 Essences Paragon were consumed by terror and began to flee, allowing Paragon Sea Dream and Meng Hao's Paragon Puppet to approach Shui Dongliu. The Paragon Puppet's eyes were bright red. Meng Hao's transformation had affected its aura as well. It stood there, eyes filled with a bizarre, demonic gleam as it looked at Shui Dongliu. Shui Dongliu remained silent for a long moment, a torn expression on his face. Finally, he clasped hands and bowed deeply to Meng Hao. I've made many plans and many preparations, and many are dead and gone because of them. I implore you to let all of that go. As for me, my conscience is clear when it comes to the mountain and sea realm. I only feel guilty about the Fang clan. Your Fang clan is an all-heaven clan, with an extraordinary bloodline. After arriving in the mountain and sea realm, your first-generation patriarch acquired heaven-defying good fortune which changed the all-heaven bloodline. Because of the multiple lives offered by the Nirvana fruit, the Fang clan bloodline became the most suitable for my designs. Furthermore, you are the epitome and culmination of the Fang clan bloodline. Therefore, Meng Hao cut in, my so-called 7th-year tribulation was actually orchestrated by you. He swished his sleeve, and the odd way his voice seemed to contain both laughter and crying was enough to cause anyone who heard it to feel unsettled. After a moment, Shui Dongliu nodded. Your 7th-year tribulation was caused by me. I was the one who arranged for your grandpa Meng to become a mountain and sea lord, and it was I who extracted your grandpa Fang's soul and placed it into the heaven-severing scripture. I also arranged everything that happened with your parents. I was the one who sent them to stand guard over planet South Heaven. That was because their souls were the most likely to become the propelling souls. Even the enmity between the Jai clan and your Fang clan was set up by me. Your cultivation of the hexing magics of the League of Demon Sealers was my doing. My purpose in all of this was for you to become the new will of the mountains and seas, or perhaps the immortal. However, along the way, you changed your own fate. Throughout my life, I never let the mountains and seas down. I did let the Fang clan down. However, your grandpa Fang isn't really dead, and in some ways your parents aren't dead either. Soon, if my plan succeeds, I will destroy myself in front of you. I will dig out my heart and offer my life as a sacrifice to the blood of the Fang clan. If my plan fails, then I will still wipe out my own soul fire to help you get what you want. Expand. All of my plans were centered around the Fang clans. Nirvanic rebirth. Even as the words left his mouth, Shui Dongliu suddenly looked up toward the apex of the starry sky, and a mad fire seemed to be burning in his eyes. It was in that exact same moment that the highest point of the starry sky suddenly distorted and twisted, and the starry sky even seemed to melt. Then, it spread apart to reveal a portion of the vast expanse beyond. There was also an enormous land mass speeding forward, a continent. The land mass was gargantuan and was filled with innumerable mountains and seas. Up in front were 9 huge suns, dragging it along. Rumbling sounds echoed out in all directions as it approached the mountain and sea realm at incredible speed. It was none other than the immortal god continent. This was one of the 2 major powers which had destroyed the Paragon immortal realm, the immortal god realm. Each of those 9 suns emanated the aura of a paragon. Thunderous rumbling echoed out, the starry sky melted, and the ninth mountain shook. Even just the mere pressure which was weighing down was enough to threaten to destroy the ninth mountain. The mountain and sea cultivators' minds were spinning as they stared in shock at what was happening. As for Meng Hao, he looked up and stared at the source of the chaos in the starry sky. The enormous, shocking landmass. An enormous statue was visible on that landmass, depicting a man with a calm expression and ordinary features. However, the pressure that radiated off of him was impossible to describe. Almost in the same instant that Meng Hao saw the statue, his eyes narrowed. This statue looked familiar to him. It looked exactly like the statue of the black-robed slaughter from Echelon Cultivator Dao Heaven's Paragon Magic. The only difference was that apparently the two of them had different personalities. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the nine suns all appeared within the starry sky of the mountain and sea realm. Behind them, innumerable cultivators could be seen on the landmass, patiently waiting in battle formation, apparently completely prepared to wage war. Scintillating energy filled the air, as though this land were the king of all heaven and earth, to whom myriad worlds would prostrate, with boundless immortal chi and towering godly power. It could shake the vast expanse, change time and alter space. It could even look down upon the great Taos of heaven and earth. From the look of it, not even the vast expanse could cause this world to feel fear. It was as if it were the pinnacle force in the starry sky. Compared to it, the 33 heavens were like nothing. Suddenly, an icy cold voice echoed out from the huge land mass to fill the whole mountain and sea realm. Paragon Immortal Realm, hand over the precious treasure, destroy your immortal meridians and become a lower realm. You have no hope of winning this war. A moment later, the voice of a woman could be heard, somewhat suspicious but also seemingly pleased. What is that aura, demon? Chuckling and whimpering, Meng Hao swished his sleeve, and as he looked up at the boundless land mass up above, his eyes glowed with a more intense redness than before. He licked his lips, and an air of madness began to emanate out. "Are you people happy now too?" he murmured. "Are you at ease?" The descent of the huge land mass caused the mountain and sea realm cultivators to awaken from their shock from what had just occurred with Meng Hao. The astonishing land mass caused them to feel pressure like heavenly might. Despair instantly rose up in the hearts and minds of the cultivators, and simultaneously the army of outsiders began to tremble, quickly edged backward, and then dropped to their knees to kowtow. The Eight Essences Paragon had a very serious look on his face, and inwardly he was sighing with relief. He really had no desire to tangle further with Meng Hao in combat. Meng Hao was like a nightmare, and thus he couldn't be happier to clasp hands and bow deeply to the incoming landmass. Only Dao Fang reacted differently. His eyes flickered with a strange light, and he didn't so much as bend his waist as he stood there. In fact, a slight glimmer of displeasure appeared in his eyes. It was at this point that Shui Dongliu began to laugh loudly, and his eyes glittered as he watched the immortal god continent descending, and more specifically, one corner of it that was already completely within the starry sky of the mountain and sea realm. Even as his laughter echoed out, he suddenly spoke. "You owe me. One attack, sever the corner of that landmass." Even as Shui Dongliu's voice echoed about like thunder, a black-robed figure appeared at the apex of the starry sky, right near the corner of the landmass that was jutting into the mountain and sea realm. He was blurry, making it impossible to see his face clearly. However, as soon as he appeared, an enormous murderous aura rolled out, shaking heaven and earth. Even the huge land mass began to vibrate. The black-robed man calmly lifted his hand into the air, then chopped it down toward the huge land mass. It was impossible to determine exactly the quantity or nature of the divine abilities and magical techniques he used, or if he had used any at all. In fact, it seemed like just a simple chopping motion, yet it caused the entire land mass to shake violently. Countless cultivators immediately began to cry out in alarm, and numerous shocking defensive mechanisms were unleashed, defenses that even a paragon would be hard-pressed to obliterate. In fact, those defenses were what had made this land mass virtually invincible on its journeys through the vast expanse. But now they seemed to do no good. They could do nothing to defend against this blow, and in fact, an enormous crevice opened up on the corner of the land mass that was inside the mountain and sea realm's starry sky. The crevice grew wider, turning into a vast gulch. Mountains toppled, seas were parted, and plains were shattered. In the blink of an eye, that huge corner of the land mass, which was larger by far than any of the 33 heavens, began to completely tear away from the land mass as a whole, as if it was being pried off. The land mass was being split apart. The entire world was completely shaken. The outsider's jaws dropped, and the eight essences paragon stared, eyes wide with disbelief. Even Dao Fang was so shocked that his fur stood on end. Only Meng Hao reacted differently. The flames of madness in his eyes burned bright, and he began to cackle uproariously. That chopping motion severed an entire section of the huge land mass, which was something that caused the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm and the forces of the 33 heavens to gasp in incredulity. The cultivators of the immortal god realm were dumbstruck, and the entire land mass was completely shaken. For something like this to happen went completely beyond the expectations of the cultivators there, and they didn't even have time to react to it. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the severed corner of the land mass lost its ability to sustain flight and began to fall down toward the mountain and sea realm. The countless cultivators on that corner instantly flew out, and at the same time, the black-robed man turned to leave. The entire time, he hadn't spoken a single word, neither had anyone seen his face. The immortal god continent had only just appeared and was already severely damaged, leaving them in a complete rage. "Think you can just leave?" Someone roared as more than 10 figures charged toward him. Shockingly, 9 of those figures were the ones within the suns, and the entire group all erupted with paragon power. As they closed in, the black-robed man frowned and stopped in place. Then he turned his head, allowing the paragon-level experts to see his face. It was none other than Slaughter. In that moment, the numerous paragons felt their minds spinning, as though countless lightning bolts were striking them. They all lurched to a stop, gasping, expressions of complete disbelief covering their faces as they began to cry out. "Patriarch! What is the Patriarch? It's the Patriarch!" Even as their shocked voices rang out over the immortal god continent, more figures emerged and sped toward the area. There were men and women, old-timers and youngsters, but all of them were extremely powerful. Slaughter didn't do anything more than look at them before striding off and vanishing. "Success or failure will be determined by this one opportunity," Shui Dongliu said, swishing his sleeve and looking in the direction of the rest of the land masses belonging to the 33 heavens. "Windswept, when do you plan to make your move if not now?" As soon as the words left his mouth, the 8 essences paragon's face flickered, as did those of the other outsider experts in the army. They had been aware that Windswept could be a traitor and had even prepared for such an outcome. However, Shui Dongliu's words seemed to be filled with complete and utter confidence. In the blink of an eye, that huge corner of the land mass, which was larger by far than any of the 33 heavens, began to completely tear away from the land mass as a whole, as if it was being pried off. What mattered was that the 33rd heaven, the 32nd heaven, the 31st heaven, in fact, all of the remaining heavenly land masses began to rumble and shoot toward the severed corner of the enormous land mass which was falling down through the starry sky. This scene caused the mountain and sea cultivators' hearts to tremble. A collective gasp could be heard from the outsider army. The 8 essences paragon was enraged, and even the monkey Dao Fang was astonished. The experts from the immortal god continent had exactly the same reaction, and quickly tried to unleash their power to interfere. However, Slaughter's strike had not just severed the corner. It had also contained some sort of sealing power, which was just enough to temporarily prevent the experts from the immortal god continent from invading. It was in that exact same moment that the heavenly land masses began to slam into the severed corner of the immortal god continent. Intense, rumbling sounds echoed out that could shake heaven and earth as the severed portion of the land mass was crushed into rubble. Simultaneously, the heavenly land masses were also destroyed, transforming into nothing more than ash. The collision caused all of the immortal chi, which had been part of that corner of the land mass, to be released into the mountain and sea realm. Immortal chi that was so powerful it was difficult to put into words. The land masses of the 33 heavens which were destroyed also unleashed an aura which merged with that immortal chi, filling the starry sky of the mountain and sea realm. As soon as those auras merged, a huge blast resulted, which ripped open part of the starry sky and beyond it, the vast expanse. This was what really mattered. What really mattered was this unprecedented blow struck by the land masses. Amidst rumbling sounds, an enormous hole was opened up. Instantly, the starry sky trembled, and the outsiders were thrown into shock. The 8 essences paragon was astonished, and the experts on the immortal god continent let out incredulous shouts. "They're opening the seal. They're going to make a run for it." From the look of it, that hole opened up into a tunnel. Chapter 1394, Slaughter slashes the immortal gods. Note from Deathblade. Although it's been touched on in the story already, I feel it's necessary to point out that Slaughter, despite being a clone of Wang Lin, is not Wang Lin. The details of Slaughter's story, and why he is so different from Wang Lin, will be revealed as the translation of Renegade Immortal continues to unfold. As far as ISSDH is concerned, it's enough to know that he looks like Wang Ling but is definitely not him in personality, thinking, or anything like that. Expand. The seal was the most critical factor in Shui Dongliu's plan. In addition to the 33 heavens and Dao Fang, there was something else suppressing the mountain and sea realm. A seal left behind by the two powerful forces which had fought the Paragon Immortal Realm. That was the key, and that seal's name was the Aeon Span. It actually didn't exist within the mountain and sea realm itself, but outside of the 33 heavens. Also, only the arrival of the immortal god continent and the pressure which came with it could make the invisible Aeon Span appear in the starry sky of the mountain and sea realm. This was the very moment that Shui Dongliu had been waiting for. Tearing open that seal required a blow from a powerful landmass, like what had just happened. In addition, the auras of both the 33 heavens and the immortal god realm needed to be fused with demonic chi. Those three types of energy, when merged together, could weaken the Aeon Span. Missing even one of them was unacceptable, but with all of them together, along with the force produced by continents colliding, a hole could be opened. That was the purpose of Windsweep's traitorous act, and that was the purpose of Slaughter severing a corner of the land mass. All of that was necessary to break open the seal. It required meticulous planning and the perfect amount of elements involved. It required calculating exactly how many of the heavenly land masses were required, as well as the exact size of the corner of the immortal god continent that needed to be severed. Shui Dongliu had prepared for countless years for this very moment. He had sent many people to attack the 33 heavens, to die fighting Dao Fang, all to measure the exact extent of the Aeon Span. In the end, all the scattered information that had been gathered were pieced together to form a precise answer to the question. And that was merely the first phase of Shui Dongliu's plan. Suddenly, his words rang out to the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. What I cared about regarding this war was neither how each battle in the war progressed nor whether we would ultimately be victorious, he murmured. Rather, I cared about how to preserve the mountain and sea realm. From the very beginning, I needed to accomplish three tasks. The first task was to draw out the war until the immortal god continent arrived. Yes, I was sure that they would be the first to arrive. The second task was to preserve the true resources of the mountains and seas until their arrival. Even at the cost of innumerable lives, it was important to save the final salvo for the critical moment. Because of that, many cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were sacrificed, all for the future. There was no one above sacrifice, all of you, and even me. All of that sacrifice was necessary to fuel the third phase of my plan. You can't blame me for keeping so many cards up my sleeves. I hid everything and deceived everyone. The third task I needed to accomplish in this war was the part of the plan that involved Planet South Heaven and the Fang clan. There is a seal in place on Planet South Heaven that mountain and sea cultivators cannot affect. It was necessary for me to use the outsiders to destroy it. Don't forget, Planet South Heaven is also known as the Door of South Heaven. The power to propel the wings could not come from Fang Ziyufeng and his wife alone. Every flap of the wings drains massive amount of soul power. Those souls are the souls of the 99% of the mountain and sea cultivators who have died in the fighting. In the end, they had to die, and they had to die before the immortal god continent arrived. If they died too late, there wouldn't be enough time to absorb them and propel the wings. Shui Dongliu's voice seemed to be filled with grief, a grief which was reflected in the glow of his eyes. I'm sorry, I've been keeping so much hidden from you. The price to be paid was the lives of 99% of the mountain and sea realm. If we succeed, then the mountain and sea realm can escape from this war and fly to freedom. If we fail, then my Dao will be destroyed and I will fight to the death. Shui Dongliu flicked his sleeve. As the hole opened up in the starry sky, the surrounding outsider army was shocked, and the powerful experts from the immortal god continent instantly went on guard. Then, Shui Dongliu raised his hands high above his head. Mountain and sea realm, awaken. The instant the words left his mouth, a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering power erupted out from Shui Dongliu. Energy surged out as the second phase of his plan was unfurled. As his energy erupted out and his voice echoed through the starry sky, the pressure weighing down from the immortal god continent actually caused the crumbled ninth mountain to suddenly emit massive rumbling sounds and reappear whole within the starry sky. The ninth mountain stood just as it had before. Within the celestial pond, the Xuanwu turtle howled, but this time it was capable of more than just making noise. This time it flew up out of the pond, energy erupting out from its body. At the same time, the eighth mountain, seventh mountain, sixth mountain, fifth mountain, all of the mountains which had been destroyed in the war, reappeared for all to see, erect within the starry sky, radiating intense energy. When the first mountain appeared, all 9 mountains could be seen. It was as if they hadn't even sustained a scratch of damage. Apparently, what had been destroyed were mere projections. This was Shui Dongliu's plan, to completely fool the outsiders as well as the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. The mountain and sea realm had not been destroyed. Next, the first sea appeared, then the second sea, the third sea, and so on, until 8 seas could be seen, pulsing with boundless power that caused the starry sky to tremble. The outsiders were flabbergasted and couldn't believe what they were seeing. There was one sea missing, the ninth sea. It really had turned traitor and was now sitting there uneasily among the outsider army. Within the same army, the 8 essences paragon's face turned grim to the extreme. Off to the side, the monkey Dao Fang's eyes were glowing brightly with shock and fear. Now it makes sense. When I destroyed that mountain with my staff, I couldn't help but wonder why the mountains were so weak. No wonder. And here I thought the mountain and sea realm was weak. How could I ever have imagined that I was so far from the truth? Dao Fang clenched his right hand into a fist. The feeling of being completely and utterly made a fool of filled his eyes with murderous rage. Meng Hao's laughter suddenly ceased, and no sounds of crying could be heard. He was suddenly very quiet, as though his aura had returned to its normal state. However, his eyes were just as red as ever, indicating that henceforth he was not an immortal but a demon. He looked at the newly reformed mountain and sea realm, which seemed even more intensely real than the mountain and sea realm which he knew. There was a boundlessness to it, something that seemed to conform perfectly with the boundless, domineering nature of Paragon 9 Seals, who had created it. Although this development was surprising, after thinking about it for a moment, Meng Hao realized that it was all within the purview of predictability. However, things weren't over yet. The resources of the mountain and sea realm weren't limited to this. The destroyed sun and moon suddenly reappeared, and all of a sudden, Meng Hao realized that the bow he had was not the true precious treasure. It was only a projection. When the sun reappeared, the bow projection turned into a beam of light that shot back to the sun itself. Furthermore, the precious treasure that K. Siddhigarbha had acquired from the moon did the same thing as it returned to the moon. The sun and the moon began to shine with brilliant light, filling the starry sky with boundless radiance. Surviving cultivators of the mountain and sea realm stared with overt shock. It was as if the pressure weighing down on the realm had finally reached the point where it couldn't be sustained anymore, causing the whole world to erupt. Rumbling could be heard as the immortal ancient Taoist rite appeared. It was as if time were changing. An enormous coffin rose up, glittering with immortal light. It slowly began to open, and a withered hand reached up from within and grasped the side of the coffin. Then an old man pulled himself to his feet. Instantly, the aura of an 8 essences paragon erupted out, causing a gasp to rise up from the outsider army. The outsiders' 8 essences paragon stared with wide eyes, and Dao Fang's pupils constricted. "Taoist immortal ancient," said an ancient voice from the immortal god continent. The old man standing up from within the coffin was none other than Taoist immortal ancient, who was second only to 9 seals in the paragon immortal realm. His cultivation base was at the 8 essences level, but he actually stood on the very cusp of 9 essences. As that happened, one of the other 3 great Taoist societies, the 9 Seas God World, summoned numerous god doors. As they opened, countless figures appeared, clad in brown armor, radiating ancient, murderous auras. Apparently, they had been asleep for a very long time but had now awakened and were slowly appearing. Dozens of them could be seen, and each one erupted with the pressure of an imperial lord. It was an ancient, primeval aura that not even Wang Yaokai and the other newly raised imperial lords could match up to. Next was the Sublime Flow Sword Grotto. Massive rumbling could be heard as 1 billion swords materialized, which shot forth to swirl around the mountain and sea realm. Each one of those 1 billion swords contained an ancient soul, which were none other than the souls of the cultivators who had died when the catastrophe struck the Paragon immortal realm. They had been sleeping up until this moment, but now they were awake. Things weren't over yet. The mountain and sea realm continued to rumble as three temples appeared, which shone with boundless light and the power of scriptures. These were the temples of the three great Dayens and also the origin of the three classic scriptures. It was also in this very moment that a completely shocking will swept through the starry sky. It was none other than the will of the mountains and seas. It had been slowly weakened from the beginning of the war until it finally dispersed. But as of this moment, it had formed back together to shocking effect. It was far more powerful than it had been before. This was the true and authentic will of the mountains and seas. The pressure weighing down caused all of the outsiders in the mountain and sea realm to reel from astonishment, blood spraying out of their mouths. Regardless of the levels of their cultivation base, they fell back in shock. That was even more true of the eight essences Paragon and Dao Fang, both of whom looked completely crestfallen. This, the eight essences Paragon muttered, and yet the mountain and sea realm's resources were still abundant and continued to erupt out. A roaring sound echoed out from the first sea as the sea water churned. Shockingly, a huge giant rose up from the depths of the sea floor. It was enormous, and its body was covered with countless glowing white designs. Heaven and earth cowered beneath it, and most notable of all was that its face had three eyes. It extended its hand and made a grasping motion, and in response, a beam of light shot out from the first mountain, within which was a gigantic battle axe. The giant grabbed the battle axe and then let out a powerful roar. Cries of shocked alarm rang out from the immortal god continent, a three-eyed god. The three-eyed god tribe was from one of the few lower realms who had chosen not to rebel. Their battle prowess was strong, and in fact, they had fought fiercely with the god tribes of the immortal god continent. The resources of the mountains and seas exploded out. Rumbling sounds echoed out as heaven and earth dimmed, the starry sky trembled, and everything shook violently. Chapter 1395. The mountains and seas erupt. /expand. Next, beams of light shot out from the second mountain, and as the second sea churned, a war chariot appeared, completely vicious in appearance and emanating a boundless glow, as well as ghastly coldness. Apparently, this war chariot could pierce the souls of paragons. In the blink of an eye, the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth mountains and their respective seas all unleashed powerful resources. Some of them came from the mountains, some from the planets themselves. Astonishingly, a completely domineering river of reincarnation flowed out from the fourth mountain. Soaring energy and countless roars echoed out from within the mountain and sea realm, causing widespread shock among the outsiders. From the 9 mountains, the 9 Xuanwu turtles roared forth, energy surging, eyes brimming with killing intent that caused the starry sky to tremble. It was also in this moment that, outside of the 9th mountain, planet South Heaven began to rumble. Shui Dongliu's eyes shone with a bright light. And now, the third phase of the plan shall begin. The butterfly beneath planet South Heaven shall be released. He quickly performed a double-handed incantation gesture, then threw his head back and howled. The sound echoed out, causing planet South Heaven to tremble. It had already been on the verge of collapse, but now it completely fell apart. Massive rumbling sounds could be heard as it collapsed into clouds of rubble that spread out in all directions, revealing 100,000 motes of black light inside. Instantly, they shot out, howling with ferocity and a thirst for blood. It was as if a cage had been opened, unleashing a massive beast. Those motes of light were actually 100,000 monstrous devils. During the catastrophe that had befallen the Paragon immortal realm, they had been taken captive in battle. Then, their minds were replaced and filled with an understanding of only one thing: killing. 100,000 terrifying howls echoed out, and 100,000 pairs of crimson eyes burned. Originally, they had no formation or order, but then the will of the mountains and seas took control, sending one group toward the army of outsiders, and the other toward the apex of the starry sky and the immortal god continent. Things weren't over yet, though. After the 100,000 devils were released from within the rubble of planet South Heaven, something else appeared within the darkness. It was a butterfly. When the butterfly flew out, it didn't seem very large. However, in the blink of an eye, it began to grow like mad until it was huge. Soon, it was as big as a planet, and even then, it didn't seem like it had reached its limit. The instant the butterfly appeared, the army of outsiders erupted into pandemonium. A look of incredulity appeared on the face of the 8 essences Paragon, and Dao Fang gasped as though his mind were being struck by lightning. The immortal god continent was also shaken, and when the powerful experts there saw the butterfly, their pupils constricted. Devil butterfly. A Devil Realm World Butterfly. When the Devil Realm came, one of their world butterflies was supposedly destroyed. Who could ever have guessed that it didn't actually die but instead was imprisoned here? Its mind was erased, and it became part of the immortal world. They actually want to use this world butterfly to break free from the battlefield. But that's impossible. In the grand scheme of things, Devil Realm world butterflies are vitally important. There were only 9 of them, and even if the immortal world subjugated one, it would be extremely difficult to control. Wait, look closely, that butterfly is actually dead. Countless voices erupted out in discussion. By this point, people were able to deduce Shui Dongliu's true plan. He planned to use this world butterfly as the new version of the mountain and sea realm, to pass through that tunnel to leave the battlefield. If he succeeded, then the mountain and sea realm would have neither won the war nor lost it. However, it would gain a chance to survive, to develop, and to thrive once more. As soon as the butterfly appeared, it became clear that, just as people were saying, it was actually dead. Its eyes were blank, and there didn't appear to be even the slightest sign of life force upon it. It truly was dead. But then the butterfly's wings began to slowly fill with life force, and then were propelled first down, and then up. Meng Hao had long since waved his sleeve and extracted everyone from the crumbling and ruined planet South Heaven. He now hovered in the starry sky, looking down at the ruins, a laughing, crying expression on his face as he looked at the 100,000 devils charging into battle and the huge butterfly. When his gaze came to rest on the butterfly itself, his heart suddenly seized. He stopped laughing, stopped crying, and even the redness of his eyes flickered. There was a familiarity to the aura on the butterfly, something that he would never be able to forget for his entire life. A tremor ran through him. Off to the side, Fang Yu's eyes went wide as she stared at the butterfly, shivering. Dad and Mom. As Meng Hao stared at the butterfly, he could clearly sense the aura of his father, Fang Ziyufeng, upon the left wing of the butterfly. Furthermore, the right wing contained the life force of his mother, Meng Li. Just as Shui Dongliu had said, his parents weren't actually dead. In a certain way, they had been given new lives as the wings of this butterfly. Every flap of the wings of that butterfly was like an embrace shared between them. Gradually, Meng Hao caught sight of the image of his father and mother holding each other. Then they turned to look at him, their expressions warm and kind. They were even smiling, and it was a smile that caused tears to well up in Meng Hao's eyes. By this point, he was absolutely sure beyond the shadow of a doubt that he really was sensing the auras of his father and mother. It was also at this point that Shui Dongliu's voice echoed out again. Mountain and sea cultivators, come immediately to the mountain and sea butterfly. Henceforth, the bloodline members of the Fang clan are the guardians of the mountains and seas. The moment Shui Dongliu's voice rang out, the wings of the butterfly separated, whereupon a boundless gravitational force erupted out, grabbing a hold of all of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. The instant that force wrapped around them, they were pulled from all directions toward the butterfly. In the blink of an eye, they vanished into the wings, and when they reappeared, they were in a new world. This was the new immortal world. All of the people who were standing near Meng Hao, including Su Qing, Pill Demon, Fatty, Fang Yu, Sun Hai, and even Patriarch Reliance, were instantly absorbed into the butterfly, to appear within that new world. As for Meng Hao, he neared, but did not step onto the butterfly itself. He remained off to the side to stand guard, to defend this world that contained his loved ones, his friends, and the Fang clan. The butterfly began to pick up speed as it shot, toward the hole in the starry sky. Shui Dongliu, Sea Dream, K Siddhigarbha, the Paragon Puppet, and all of the other backup reserves of the mountains and seas flew in formation around the butterfly, guarding it, as it made its break toward the tunnel. It was in that exact same moment that a roar rose up from the outsider army as they prepared to block the way. The 8 Essences Paragon took a step forward, and a vicious expression appeared on Dao Fang's face as he hefted his staff and began his charge. However, before they could even get close, Meng Hao suddenly turned his head to look at them, and then licked his lips, causing both the 8 Essences Paragon and Dao Fang to stop in their tracks. At the apex of the starry sky, what was left of the immortal god continent once again continued its descent. The sun screamed forth, along with the figures inside of them, as they shot toward the butterfly. There were other powerful experts from the immortal god continent who also charged forth, so many that it was impossible to count. They could not permit the mountain and sea realm to make a comeback. They could not allow the mountain and sea realm to escape. But then, Shui Dongliu flicked his sleeve, and an obsessive gleam of determination appeared in his eyes. "Life and death will be determined in this moment," he roared. The wills of the 8 seas erupted forth, bolstered by the Qianwu turtles to create a force so shocking that everything trembled. In concert with the power of the 9 mountains and the will of the mountain and sea realm itself, a huge spell formation began to form. The Mountain and Sea Grand Aegis. As soon as the dazzling light rose up, the backup forces of the mountain and sea realm began to virtually froth at the mouth as they prepared to fight the intercepting enemies, to defend the butterfly as it sped toward the tunnel. When the two sides clashed, massive booms rang out, and intense fighting began. The powerful experts from the immortal god continent had power to destroy the heavens and extinguish the earth, which they unleashed to full effect upon the backup reserve of the mountain and sea realm. But then, from within the rubble of planet South Heaven, hoarse laughter rang out in all directions, and a boundless sea of flames suddenly lit up the darkness as it shot out into the starry sky. Within that sea of flames was a face that Meng Hao didn't recognize. However, he did recognize its eyes. It was none other than the essence of divine flame which had been suppressed beneath the surface of planet South Heaven. "Dao Fang, you shall die," the face howled. Now that it was free, the divine flame caused everything around it to shake as it sped murderously toward Dao Fang. The mountain and sea grand aegis formed from a massive convergence of various wills, becoming a complex pattern that attempted to slaughter any of the immortal god continent cultivators or other outsiders who attempted to break through. The mountains and seas followed the butterfly, and within the boundaries of the spell formation, Meng Hao and the other powerful experts of the mountains and seas provided defense. In the middle of it all was the butterfly. The combined power of the mountain and sea realm was focused on defending the butterfly and getting to the tunnel. However, the real danger to them as they made their charge did not come from the outsider army. After all, Shui Dongliu's brutal plan had made it seem all along like the outsider army had the upper hand. However, the truth was that, while the mountain and sea cultivators were losing their lives, the true power and reserves of the mountains and seas had never been unleashed. It was harsh, but according to Shui Dongliu's plan, everyone was expendable. Because of that, the outsider army couldn't so much as get close to the mountain and sea grand aegis without being destroyed. The real danger, the real reason why Shui Dongliu had been willing to sacrifice everyone in order to keep the true reserves safe, was the immortal god continent. Rumbling echoed out as 4 of their sons unleashed boundless pressure which crushed down. Within those sons were 4 figures, each one of which burst with the matchless power of an 8 essences paragon. Behind them were countless cultivators of the immortal god continent, who were unleashing divine abilities that no one in the mountain and sea realm had ever seen before. In addition, they possessed matchless dignity and seething killing intent. In the blink of an eye, they reached the spell formation and began attacking it. Immediately, massive rumbling could be heard from the grand aegis as it rotated to full power. The will of the mountains and seas rose up, ensuring that even if the spell formation took damage, it was quickly repaired. The butterfly continued to get closer and closer to the tunnel. Chapter 1396, Devil Realm World Butterfly. /expand. The Grand Aegis was so incredible that not even an 8 essences paragon would be able to break through it in a short period of time. Not the 8 essences paragon from the 33 heavens, nor the other 5 8 essences outsider paragons, could do anything except be blocked outside. As the battle commenced, a cold snort suddenly echoed out from the immortal god continent as a beautiful woman appeared. She seemed cold and detached, and wore a long violet robe. As she strode out, a young man could be seen following along beside her. Mixed emotions could be seen on his face as he looked silently at the mountain and sea realm. The woman immediately extended her right hand and shoved her palm out toward the mountain and sea grand aegis. That gesture caused her face to redden slightly, but the massive force that erupted out shook the starry sky and sent the minds of all cultivators reeling. Even the 8 essences paragons were in awe of her aura. Hers was the aura of 9 essences. 9 essences paragon. A huge boom rang out as her attack slammed into the grand aegis, which instantly began to crumble. Normally speaking, the spell formation should not have been damaged so easily, but unfortunately, it was missing the power of 1C. That was something that Shui Dongliu hadn't figured into his plans, and never had enough time to compensate for. His original plan had called for the Grand Aegis to hold out until they reached the tunnel, or at least, until they got closer than they were now. The most he could do now was make them pay a heavy price to break through the spell formation. Even in the moment that it crumbled apart, a backlash force erupted out from it. Shui Dongliu threw his head back and howled, "Mountain and sea seal." Instantly, the shattered remnants of the spell formation shot toward the female paragon and began to form a seal around her. Even as she frowned in response, another cold snort rang out that seemed filled with complete ancientness. Accompanying it was an ancient figure who emerged from within the immortal god continent. It was an old man, wearing a white robe, with long white hair and eyebrows that made him seem extremely dignified. He held a string of prayer beads in his right hand, and as he strode out, his eyes shone like the heavens. Simultaneously, as the mountain and sea grand aegis shattered, the 5 8 essences paragons instantly burst in, followed by countless other powerful experts. "You people aren't going anywhere." Even as the hosts charged in to attack, the old man known as Taoist Immortal Ancient opened his eyes. His body seemed devoid of life force and rife with an aura of death. However, his cloudy eyes suddenly began to glow brightly, and he took a step forward, completely ignoring the other 8 essences paragons to head directly toward the old man in the white robe and white eyebrows. The two of them immediately began to exchange blows that rocked heaven and earth. At the same time, the three-eyed god roared and charged forth to block the path of an 8 essences paragon, standing firm to prevent him from even getting close to the butterfly. A bizarrely demonic glint appeared in Meng Hao's eyes as he took a step forward. No laughter or crying could be heard, but his eyes burned with crimson light, and he erupted with a shocking aura as he began to fight ruthlessly. Massive rumbling sounds echoed out as he licked his lips, the desire to slaughter and consume the enemy growing stronger within him. As of this moment, the mountain and sea realm truly had reached the most critical of junctures. Booms rang out across the battlefield. 1 billion flying swords turned into a rain of destruction. Tens of thousands of former imperial lords, the river of reincarnation, and 100,000 devils fought like mad to defend the butterfly from the immortal god continent. Meng Hao's eyes flashed with crimson light as he fought his way toward the nearest 8 essences paragon. As he closed in, his aura transformed until he was like a wild beast, oblivious to matters of life and death. That 8 essences paragon was one of the sons of the immortal god continent, with an incredibly high position. However, he had never encountered a cultivator like Meng Hao before, and within a split second, Meng Hao had torn a huge chunk of flesh off of him. His rage erupted, and just when he was about to strike back, he found himself facing a shocking god-slaying fist. Paragon Sea Dream started laughing, and a cold gleam appeared in her eyes. Without any hesitation, she began to burn what remained of her dwindling longevity in exchange for more cultivation base power, which she immediately unleashed in combat. Fighting broke out everywhere, and off in the distance, even more cultivators were approaching from the direction of the immortal god continent. Shui Dongliu roared, and his sleeves whipped about as he went up against the other 8 essences paragons. Protecting the butterfly as it continued to speed toward the tunnel was the most important thing. Even as the butterfly's head began to enter the tunnel, the sealed female paragon began to break free. Her bonds crumbled, and she took a step forward, entering the mountain and sea realm and reaching out with her right hand to grab at the butterfly. "Get back here!" Rumbling echoed out as a massive force surged toward the butterfly, which began to tremble. At the same time, the corpse of Taoist Immortal Ancient, who was fighting the white-robed old man, looked back at the butterfly, then unhesitatingly closed his eyes and self-detonated. He moved with such decisiveness that the white-robed old man's eyes widened in shock. He tried to back up, but the power of the self-detonation swept over him like floodwaters and began to spread out through the entire starry sky. Wherever it passed, outsiders and cultivators from the immortal god continent let out blood-curdling screams as they were wiped out of existence. Then, the power began to wash over the mountain and sea realm, although it did not harm any of the forces of the mountains and seas. Instead, it was targeted directly at the 9 essences female paragon. Her face fell. Even someone as powerful as herself had no choice but to evade. She immediately dispelled the force with which she was dragging the butterfly and fell back. In that same instant, the power of self-detonation transformed into a propelling force, which then shoved the butterfly toward the tunnel. "Immortal Ancient!" cried Shui Dongliu, grief filling his eyes. He knew that the immortal ancient which had appeared was already dead and couldn't last in the fight for very long. The fact that he might choose to self-detonate at a critical juncture was something that Shui Dongliu had long since taken into consideration. In fact, he himself might do just that. In all the plans he made, the only true mistake came from not predicting that the Ninth Sea would turn traitor. In the past, he had taken into consideration the potential betrayal of cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. However, he never thought that the Ninth Sea would actually make such a decision. It wasn't that he didn't know about the friction between Meng Hao and the Ninth Sea. He had taken that to be a small matter. After all, at the time it was just a difference in their points of view. Now it seemed obvious now that there was a more important reason for the Ninth Sea's betrayal. It wants to become an independent will, Shui Dongliu thought bitterly. The Ninth Sea's betrayal became the flaw in the mountain and sea grand aegis, ensuring that it could only last for a short time before being destroyed. The price to be paid to make up for that weakness was a life, and unfortunately, the life of Taoist immortal ancient was not enough. It was in this critical moment that beams of light filled the starry sky as the 8 essences paragons once again closed in. In addition, there were 2 9 essences paragons from the immortal god continent. But the three-eyed god threw his head back and laughed uproariously. Eyes gleaming with determination, he leaped forward unhesitatingly and chose to self-detonate. The blast surged out, propelling the butterfly further into the tunnel until it was halfway inside. Next, the war chariot exploded, then the ancient imperial lords. As of this moment, they all chose to self-detonate. The 1 billion flying swords and the other forces which made up the backup reserves of the mountains and seas all did the same thing. The resulting explosion caused blinding light to spread out over the battlefield. At the same time, the 9 Chuanwu turtles, as well as the 8 seas, all added power to the butterfly's movement. The incoming paragons were swept over by the force of the self-detonation blasts, and at the same time, the butterfly was pushed all the way into the tunnel. It seemed as if they were on the verge of escaping, as if within the space of a few breaths of time the mountain and sea realm would be gone, as if the immortal god continent had absolutely no time with which to react. However, it was within those few breaths of time that everything would be decided. Hordes of cultivators charged forth from the immortal god continent. The tunnel was vibrating, as though the butterfly's escape was now impossible to prevent. In Shui Dongliu's plan, the next few breaths of time were supposed to be covered by the protection of the grand aegis. However, the betrayal of the Ninth Sea turned that plan into nothing more than a dream. Even the slightest mistake must be compensated with a massive price, Shui Dongliu said softly. So many lives have already been sacrificed. Now it's my turn. With that, he took a step forward, and suddenly he seemed completely different than before. In a mere instant, he was no longer an old man, but instead, young and strapping. He took a deep breath, then extended his hand toward the mountain and sea realm. Shrink, he said. That single word caused the entire mountain and sea realm, all of the 9 mountains and the 8 seas, to shrink down into the form of a magical item which came to rest on Shui Dongliu's palm. Then he tossed it away behind him, whereupon all the surrounding cultivators, including Meng Hao, Kesidigarbha, Paragon Sea Dream, and others, were all shoved toward the tunnel, along with the shrunken mountains and seas. Struggling wasn't even an option. Meng Hao and the others were flung into the tunnel. As for the shrunken mountain and sea realm, it headed toward Meng Hao, transforming into a shining seed which merged into his forehead. Meng Hao's mind began to rumble as he looked out at Shui Dongliu, who hovered there in the starry sky, just outside the tunnel. Shui Dongliu was alone, preparing to block all oncomers, to buy the time for the butterfly which had been lost by the Ninth Sea. Shui Dongliu's voice echoed with seemingly infinite power as he said, Meng Hao, I owe the bloodline of the Fang clan. Today, I will repay what I owe you. I'm giving you the mountain and sea realm. Take it and also take my beginning-ending hexing magic. This is the League of Demon Sealers, 1st generation hex. Take my cultivation base and take my Tao. This is the final phase of my plan. Use my cultivation base and my Tao for the sake of the Paragon Immortal Realm to become something that surpasses 9 seals, surpasses paragons, surpasses immortals and devils, and is above all else, the ultimate powerful expert. Chapter 1397. I shall bestow you with ultimate good fortune. Chapter 1398. The starry sky of the vast expanse. The tunnel shook as the butterfly flew along, surrounded by Meng Hao and the other powerful experts. Countless vortexes appeared. Explosive power was gathered which dramatically increased the speed of the butterfly. However, despite that sudden outburst of speed, when they looked back, they could still see Shui Dongliu standing outside of the tunnel like a mountain. Meng Hao's red pupils flickered with mixed emotions as he watched Shui Dongliu suddenly growing much larger. He was no longer old, but rather a man in his prime. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, causing a shocking aura to rise up around him. There was also brilliant light, all of which was the power of a 9 essences cultivation base, which roared to life inside of him. However, he seemed incapable of actually making a move. His cultivation base rocketed up, but all he could do was stand there, as if to use himself, to block the entrance to the tunnel. If anyone on the other side wanted to enter, they would have to destroy him first. It was in that exact same moment when he began to grow larger, and his cultivation base grew more powerful, that in some mysterious fashion, he formed a connection to the mountain and sea realm seed within Meng Hao's body. It was like a spiritual consecration, like the transmission of a Tao, causing Meng Hao to shake and his mind to rumble. Boundless understanding of the Tao of heaven, complete mastery regarding cultivation bases, and deep comprehension regarding various magical techniques all passed into Meng Hao from Shui Dongliu. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal, but a boundless cultivation base power, as well as life force essence, all poured into Meng Hao. Trembling, he let out a howl as shocking and monumental changes occurred inside of him. Outside of the tunnel, the frustrated howls of the people from the immortal god continent could be heard. It's immortal Tao transference. He's using himself as the seed, then self-immolating to help someone else ascend. That's a magical technique left behind from the Paragon Immortal realm, but originally it was completely malevolent. You could consume another person to help ascension, but this guy, he's using that magic in the opposite way. Midst the buzz of conversation, the 9 essences female paragon frowned for a moment, then snorted and took a step forward. The old man with the white eyebrows and robe sighed and continued to advance. As for the other 8 essences paragons, they also approached. It took only a moment for rumbling sounds to fill all ears as they closed in with deadly force on Shui Dongliu. Shui Dongliu chuckled, and his eyes shone brightly as he looked at the virtually all-powerful cultivators of the immortal god realm. We mountain and sea cultivators, live and die for the mountains and seas. His hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, summoning a divine ability. Drawing upon himself, he burned his own body and unleashed his cultivation base, partly to block his opponents and partly to give to Meng Hao. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as he sustained countless injuries. However, he didn't shrink back in the slightest. He stood there outside of the tunnel, laughing just as before. I'm not 9 seals, although my body contains a stream of 9 seals discarnate soul. I'm not sure whether he used me to gain another life or if I used him to return to the world. The question of who I actually am is something I've pondered for countless millennia. Perhaps I've known the answer all along. I was originally a Morning Death soul. In the end, though, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. 1. The Morning Death clan and the Morning Death souls are from the novel Beseech the Devil. I don't really know much about them. I just know that they existed in that novel and were relevant in the later parts of the story. I called back the clone of the fallen god and allowed the enemy to stay within the mountains and seas. I discussed the Tao with extermination and asked about the heaven of all living things. 2. You might remember a while back I said that the man on the boat seemed like he might be Old Man Extermination from Beseech the Devil. This seems to confirm that. I spared no effort. I did everything I could. Perhaps some people will hate me and perhaps some will denounce me, but when it comes to the mountain and sea realm, I will never, ever have any regrets. I have lived my life for the mountain and sea realm and now I will die for it. My wish is fulfilled and I have absolutely no regrets. We mountain and sea cultivators live and die for the mountains and seas. As Shui Dongliu laughed, a look of madness gleamed in his eyes for the first time ever. Just before he was about to be completely destroyed by the enemy, he made the same choice that so many other cultivators of the mountain and sea realm had made when they were on the verge of dying. Self-detonation. By means of self-detonation, he would injure those who were giving chase. By means of self-detonation, he would pass on his legacy with burning speed to Meng Hao to deliver to him superlative good fortune. Shui Dongliu was self-detonating. As soon as that happened, the vortexes in the tunnel spun faster than ever, increasing the butterfly's speed dramatically. It took only a moment for it to shoot far off in the distance. It was also in that moment that Meng Hao's mind filled with the crash of infinite thunderclaps. He shook visibly as countless Taos filled his thoughts, provoking frenzied growth within him. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and his vision swam for a moment before he passed out. Paragon Sea Dream quickly caught him. Then she, along with everyone else atop the butterfly, looked back with mixed emotions at the blinding, scintillating lights flashing near the entrance of the tunnel. However, it didn't take long before a huge boom echoed out from that very area. A moment later, vast numbers of immortal god cultivators poured in. At the same time, their huge continent also reached the tunnel itself. Moments later, the tunnel itself began to crumble into pieces. In that very instant, the butterfly was rapidly sucked out to the end of the tunnel. Time seemed to slow until it was impossible to tell how much had passed. When things returned to normal, they were in the starry sky of the vast expanse, shooting out from a vortex which had just appeared. When the mountain and sea cultivators looked out, they saw an endless starry sky, the vast expanse. There were no planets or heavenly bodies, only layers of pulsing mist. Behind them was where the mountain and sea realm had formerly been located. Looking back, they could see a blurry vortex, within which were countless dots of light. This was the first time most of these cultivators had seen the outside world, and it looked very unfamiliar. Meng Hao was still unconscious, but a shocking power seemed to be brewing within him, stirring and rumbling. The butterfly quickly shot out into the vast expanse. However, it didn't take long before rumbling sounds echoed out from the very location it had just emerged from. The vortex which had been ripped open suddenly grew larger, then exploded as a gigantic land mass emerged. Then that vortex, which was connected to the former location of the mountain and sea realm shattered, vanished for all eternity. What had just emerged was none other than the immortal god continent, which immediately cast countless enraged and murderous auras out in all directions. The boundless starry sky of the vast expanse, they won't be able to escape. When the immortal god continent chases someone, they can't escape. Meng Hao, the name of the successor is Meng Hao. After a moment, they determined the direction Meng Hao and the others had taken, and went all out in pursuit. Even as the immortal god continent gave chase, a lone ship appeared within the vast expanse. It hovered there, an old man on the prow, who suddenly opened his eyes and looked off into the distance. After a moment passed, he shook his head and sighed. If they knew the truth about it all, would they do this? He murmured. Perhaps the only person who knew which they he referred to was him. Another moment passed, and then the ship began to fade away. The old man continued his never-ending journey. Apparently, his stop in the mountain and sea realm had just been a brief respite from a lifelong journey. Now, he made his way off into the distance once again. Perhaps we will never meet again, and yet that demon seemed quite interesting. He sighed and his eyes glittered thoughtfully. Even as the ship disappeared, an emaciated cultivator appeared off in another direction. Hovering at his side was an enormous mosquito. Both of them looked off into the distance. The cultivator had a wretched appearance, but at the moment, he was frowning in apparent hesitation. Is this war really necessary? Lunatics. They're all lunatics. It was all to prevent the immortal from appearing, all to transform him into the demon. If Wang Mu were here, he would instantly recognize this gaunt old man. He was none other than his master, who had taught him the ways of cultivation in the bamboo forest of the Wang clan. After a moment passed, the gaunt cultivator sighed. The jinx has been gone for many, many years, gone to parts unknown, and yet the same type of thing is happening again. Ah well, forget it, I'm not getting involved. The emaciated cultivator shook his head, then began to make his way off into the distance. Perhaps from his perspective, what the immortal god continent was doing was a bit excessive, maybe even vile. Yet in the end, it wasn't anything fatally wrong. Even Slaughter appeared, looking off into the distance. Apparently, even he felt that what was happening was relatively meaningless. It was possible that, at this point in time, there was no one who could foresee what type of explosive tempest would arise because of the events playing out. The immortal had become the demon, and the demon could change the entire vast expanse. The pursuit was underway. The final events of the war which had just played out caused mixed feelings to rise up in the hearts of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm regarding Shui Dongliu. Shui Dongliu had given the mountain and sea realm hope. When they were mired in the depths of hopelessness, he had provided a slight chance for survival. That tiny chance had grown larger and larger, until survival now was a distinct possibility. Although it seemed possible that the butterfly might still meet destruction, the truth was that the instant it had emerged from that vortex into the vast expanse, the mountain and sea realm had already escaped the fate of certain destruction. As of this moment, the mountain and sea realm was in control of its own fate. There were no fetters and no seals. There were no 33 heavens and no Dao Fang. There was no Ian Seal. There were no two powers crushing down on them from above. It could even be said that the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm had finally acquired true freedom. Tens upon tens of thousands of years had passed since the Paragon immortal realm, and during that time they had never possessed freedom. They were being chased, but as far as the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm were concerned, they still had their freedom. The downside was that the cost of that freedom had been immeasurable. As for the handful of cultivators who actually remained behind, when they thought about that seemingly impossible chance which Shui Dongliu had procured, they were filled with mixed feelings, including both hatred and respect. 99% of the cultivators had died. In exchange for that, every flap of the wings of the butterfly caused more of the dead souls of the mountain and sea realm cultivators to fade away. In fact, it might be better to say that the wings were not being propelled by Fang Ziyufeng and Meng Li, but rather by the lives of the mountain and sea cultivators. Chapter 1399, The Butterfly Flies. Shui Dongliu self-detonated to block the path of the enemy, all to buy just a bit of time for the butterfly, to help Meng Hao successfully lead the realm to survival. When it came to his choices and actions, no one could judge whether they were completely right or wrong, or whether in the grand scheme of things he had done good or evil. The only thing that remained behind were complicated thoughts and emotions. Everyone stood there silently as the butterfly sped out into the vast expanse. Meng Hao was still unconscious, as he had been ever since the final moments in the tunnel. He could not stay in the world which existed inside the butterfly. When the others tried to take him inside, the butterfly began to tremble as if it were about to disperse. Therefore, they were forced to leave him outside, atop the body of the butterfly itself. See Dream, K. Siddhagarbha, and everyone else remained in his vicinity as Dharma protectors. There were two other figures near him, a Taoist couple. It was none other than Fang Ziyufeng and Meng Li. They didn't look the least bit incorporeal. They were as solid as if they were real, and they sat next to Meng Hao, looking softly at their Hayar. In their eyes, Meng Hao would always be their little baby. Hayar, we didn't leave. Wake up and you can see us. Hayar. The others around Meng Hao looked at his parents with expressions of deep respect. Even Paragon C. Dream had clasped hands and bowed deeply to them when they had appeared. Everyone knew that the butterfly itself belonged to the Fang clan, and that the two souls propelling the wings were none other than this husband and wife. They had not died, but had been reborn into a new, eternal form of life. The butterfly was still flapping its wings, carrying its group of homeless wanderers off into the vast expanse. Behind them was the immortal god continent, giving chase at top speed, drawing ever closer. In a different direction out in the vast expanse was another land mass, deathly silent, being pulled along by several huge butterflies. That land mass was currently changing its course to head toward Meng Hao's location. Backslash. Meng Hao was dreaming. Within that dream there was endless lightning and thunder. He heard laughter and weeping that seemed to rip everything asunder. As the lightning crashed around him, black veins could be seen snaking across his body. Something else was visible, a distinct symbol. A hexing magic. A hexing magic of the League of Demon Sealers. Meng Hao had already mastered the second through eighth hexes. Now, he was surrounded by lightning that apparently came from Shui Dongliu's first hex, which was in the process of fusing into him, enabling him to gain enlightenment of the first demon sealing hex, the beginning-ending hex. All living things are affected by the cause and effect of karma, by life and death. All things have a beginning and an end. In addition to the hexing magic, Meng Hao was surrounded by a vast sea. That sea was like a cultivation base, filling his world with enormous crashing waves that he was actually able to absorb. His cultivation base was rising unceasingly, and his mind was seething with countless Taoist magics which were capable of rocking all creation, of altering the heavens. It was hard to say how much time passed before the lightning within that world faded. When it finally happened, Meng Hao closed his eyes and sank down into the depths of the cultivation base sea. Within those depths were 9 tiny mountains, between which were 8 seas that remained unfused with the cultivation base sea. Meng Hao settled cross-legged amidst the 9 mountains and 8 seas, eyes closed in meditation. He appeared to be seeking enlightenment. His face was occasionally twisted with struggle, occasionally blank with confusion, occasionally beaming with joy. There were constant changes, and at the same time the sea around him was gradually shrinking down. The surrounding 9 mountains and 8 seas seemed to be connecting to Meng Hao in some mysterious fashion, and were even shaking in concert with his heartbeat. 8 complex symbols gradually appeared on his forehead. The last of those symbols was only half complete and still in the process of growing. These were Meng Hao's hexing magics. When that last symbol was complete, it would indicate that Meng Hao could wield all 8 generations of hexing magic. The rest of the symbols all had varying levels of essence aura emanating off of them, as if they might burst forth with essence aura at any time. Surrounding Meng Hao were 33 soul lamps, of which 18 were burning and 15 were extinguished. Of the 18 burning soul lamps, one was the prime lamp. Were it to be destroyed, it would result in Meng Hao's death. All of a sudden, one of the 18 soul lamps suddenly went out. As more time passed, more of the lamps were extinguished. Each time that happened, black smoke would rise up and pour into Meng Hao's body. His cultivation base, his aura, and his fleshly body all experienced incredible growth. The good fortune from Shui Dongliu was doing just as he had intended. It was transforming Meng Hao into a consummate peak expert. Although the process was somewhat slow and might last a long time, it was a process that would not stop. At the same time, the immortal god continent was closing in on the butterfly. There, Paragon Sea Dream looked at Meng Hao for a long moment and then finally made a decision. She rose to her feet, looked out at the vast expanse with an expression of sadness, and then softly murmured, "Everyone from that generation has gone. Now it's my turn, the most useless of them all. I can sense the devil realm up ahead, and the immortal god realm chasing us. I'm the most good-for-nothing of the paragons. My cultivation base isn't sufficient, and my skill and strategy is lacking. I've been able to do very, very little." She stood there for a moment silently. I watched the mountain and sea realm be destroyed, and I watched her appear. I watched as the butterfly soared out into the starry sky, and now I watch as the enemy pursues us. What else can I do? I've lived a long time in this life of mine, and yet still, I'm useless. The only thing I ever had was my plan with the echelon. Well, now is the time to accomplish my purpose with that plan. The hope of the mountain and sea realm lies, not with me, but with him. She turned her head to look at the unconscious Meng Hao. Then her eyes flickered with determination, and she reached her hand out and pointed at one of the butterfly wings. The gesture instantly caused 2 people to vanish from within the world of the butterfly wing. They were the only 2 remaining echelon cultivators other than Meng Hao, and a moment later, they reappeared in front of Sea Dream. One of them was the echelon cultivator from the first mountain, Dao Heaven. The other was the 7th mountain's echelon cultivator, Yuan Giant. They had not yet recovered from the injuries they had sustained in the war, but as soon as they appeared and realized where they were, they looked over at Meng Hao, and then clasped hands and bowed to Paragon Sea Dream. She looked at them silently for a moment, then softly said, "Are you 2 ready?" Dao Heaven and Yuan Giant had looks of staunch determination on their faces as they nodded deeply. They had already lost everything, their homes, their clans. As for friends, they only had a few left. All that truly remained in their hearts was a throbbing hatred. "Well then," Sea Dream continued, "it's time to execute the echelon mission. I worked on this plan for many, many years, the only strategy I ever came up with. In a moment, I will unleash a reincarnation magic, which will be fed by your life forces. I will send one of you to the immortal god continent, and the other to the devil realm. There, you will be like seeds planted to overthrow the enemy. Your futures will be bleak, and you might even die in the process. There is an even greater likelihood that my plan has no hope of succeeding at all, and that you will be able to do nothing to topple either of those 2 great powers." Sea Dream closed her eyes and murmured to herself, "However, it's still worth trying." With that, her eyes sparkled. She slowly extended her right hand and tapped Yuan Giant's forehead. His body began to tremble, and the echelon mark on his forehead radiated scintillating light that cascaded around him. It gradually covered his entire body until Yuan Giant transformed into ash. Then he disappeared. The strand of his soul which was left was propelled by means of Paragon Sea Dream's life force essence out into the vast expanse. There, it would look for a path to reincarnation, a way, to find its way through the void to the devil realm. "Let my memories guide you. Let my life force be your path. Take power from my cultivation base to enter the cycle of reincarnation. I was part of the great catastrophe that struck the Paragon immortal realm. Back then, I managed to leave a mark in the devil realm. Go, echelon cultivator." Rumbling sounds echoed out as Yuan Giant's soul vanished into the vast expanse, following a strange path to enter the reincarnation cycle of the devil realm. The magical technique being used was something beyond description. However, This was truly Paragon Sea Dream's soul plan. Even the scheme with Windswept had been arranged by Shui Dongliu and had not been carried out by herself. Dao Heaven's eyes flickered with bright light. Then he took a deep breath and closed his eyes. In almost that same moment, the echelon mark on his forehead began to shine, surrounding his body with light. Then he vanished from the butterfly. After accomplishing these things, Paragon Sea Dream coughed up a mouthful of blood and seemed to wither. She had already been burning her life force back in the fight for the mountain and sea realm, and had accomplished her plan only by means of sacrificing some of her essence. Now, she was like an oil lamp on the verge of sputtering out. Finally, it's my turn. Smiling, she waved her sleeve and took a step forward to appear out in the vast expanse, off of the surface of the butterfly. There, she stretched both arms out wide, causing rumbling sounds to echo out from inside of her. At the same time, an invisible fire began to burn away at her. There wasn't the slightest bit of hesitation in her actions. She knew that her soul would disperse, that she would not enter the cycle of reincarnation, and that her Tao foundation would be destroyed. Even still, she took every scrap of power that she had, every bit of life force, and burned it hard and fast. In that moment, she once again looked like she had when she was young. Her body trembled as shocking fluctuations emanated out, transforming into a destructive vortex around her. She was not choosing to self-detonate. Instead, she was burning all her remaining cultivation base to become divine sense power that spread out in all directions. She was using her death to find a direction for the mountain and sea realm and the butterfly to travel in, a direction where safety would exist for later generations. She was a paragon, always and forever. Perhaps she didn't have the ultimate cultivation base, and perhaps she wasn't the most capable, but the sun and the moon and all the heavens could bear witness that her heart belonged to the mountain and sea realm. Rumbling could be heard as her divine sense spread out, backed by the burning of her cultivation base and life force. It spread out into the boundless expanse, searching everywhere for the slightest chance of survival for the mountain and sea realm. She could sense the ever-nearing immortal god continent and the approach of the devil realm. As her divine sense continued to spread out unceasingly, her body withered rapidly. In the end, she began to fall apart. Her legs transformed into motes of light that began to dissipate. And yet she didn't give up, all to find hope for the mountain and sea realm. Chapter 1400, Green Coffin Vortex. Sea Dream's divine sense spread out further and further. Everything from her waist down had transformed into motes of light. It was then that, shockingly, she noticed a vortex spinning somewhere far, far away. It was a vortex larger and grander than the space once occupied by the Paragon Immortal Realm, and within it could be sensed an intense, terrifying pressure that was no less powerful than that exerted by the immortal god continent. There was indescribable danger inside, and within the cracks and crevices that riddled the swirling vortex, it was just possible to discern that in the centermost region was a coffin. The coffin was green, and inside of it was the corpse of a woman who almost appeared to be sleeping. Next to the coffin was a stone stele, upon which was a line of script that Paragon Sea Dream could just barely read. The entire starry sky owes me a debt, and likewise, I owe you a debt. You could awaken from slumber if you wished, but you do not. Well then, I will use this starry sky, transformed into the vast expanse, to accompany you in death. That vortex was a place that had nothing whatsoever to do with the mountain and sea realm, the immortal god continent, or the devil realm. It was another world, a world that had seen the passing of countless ages. Apparently, it had even existed back in the days when there was no immortal god continent or devil realm. Apparently, the reason why the vast expanse existed to begin with was because of that world. Sea Dream had never seen this woman before, but as soon as she laid eyes on her, her mind reeled. Somehow, she was filled with the sensation that this was the place where the mountain and sea realm could find its chance at survival. The vortex itself was bizarre in appearance. It consisted only of the colors black and white, and also contained some sort of time-shifting magic, which made it so that Paragon Sea Dream couldn't examine it for very long. A moment later, her divine sense was on the verge of running out, so she retracted it. By now, everything below her neck had transformed into light. That's the place. That is where the mountain and sea realm has a chance to survive. She seemed excited as she pulled back her divine sense, and yet, it was in that same moment that the vast expanse churned as the immortal god continent appeared not too far away in the distance. However, Paragon Sea Dream continued to smile as her head transformed into motes of light. Those motes of light, then propelled the butterfly ahead with incredible speed, and with it, all of the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm. Rumbling could be heard as the butterfly shot away from the immortal god continent, which continued to pursue relentlessly, despite the distance between them. The motes of light were all that remained of Paragon Sea Dream, and they were about to fade away. She quickly pushed the butterfly toward the vortex she had discovered with her divine sense, and passed on the information about it to Fang Ziyufeng and Meng Li. Go there, and that is where hope exists. The butterfly changed its course, speeding rapidly in the direction indicated by Paragon Sea Dream. At this point, the motes of light that were Sea Dream began to fade away. She watched as the butterfly disappeared off in the distance. Smiling, she offered it all of her well wishes. She was Sea Dream, who had stood guard over the mountain and sea realm ever since the final battle of the Paragon Immortal Realm. Now, she was dying. Shui Dongliu gave the last bit of his life force to buy hope for the mountain and sea realm, and now Sea Dream did the same thing. She gave her life to point the realm in the right direction. Big bro 9 seals, I'm coming to join you. I'm the most useless of everyone. I was useless back then, and now, I'm just as useless. I didn't even kill an imperial lord, let alone a paragon, completely useless. To all you children of the mountain and sea realm, I truly hope that you can live quiet and safe lives. Smiling, Paragon Sea Dream faded away into the vast expanse, for all eternity. Of all the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm on the butterfly, the only one to witness her passing was K. Siddhigarbha. When she was gone, a look of deep sadness appeared in his eyes. As for Meng Hao, he was currently in that other world in his mind. Because of the sea of his cultivation base, he was growing more powerful. Of the soul lamps which surrounded him, a total of 20 were extinguished. Of the hex marks on his forehead, the one which represented the first hex was more than half complete. Essence was growing rapidly within the 8 marks. The demonic chi and immortal chi within him, as well as all other types of energy, were rapidly fusing together, transforming into a completely bizarre aura. His heart was now beginning to pound. Thump, 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 thump. With every beat of his heart, it felt as if lightning were crashing in his brain. Gradually, the effect spread outside of his body, causing bursts of lightning to appear in the vast expanse beyond the butterfly. Time passed, although it was hard to say exactly how much. The butterfly shot through the vast expanse in the direction Paragon Sea Dream had indicated, drawing ever closer to the vortex she had discovered. One day, the murkiness of the vast expanse lessened. Ahead of the butterfly, a huge vortex had become visible. It was so large that, although it was a vast distance away, it looked very close. This was none other than the location Paragon Sea Dream had seen with her divine sense. In the same moment that the vortex became visible, the vast expanse filled with rumbling sounds as the immortal god continent appeared once again. The starry sky of the vast expanse was so vastly large that no one could truly say how large it was. Or perhaps it would be more correct to say that people who did know the answer to that question were incredibly rare. To most cultivators and even other life forms, the starry sky that was the vast expanse was essentially unending. After all, most beings wouldn't be able to travel to the ends of the vast expanse, not even the immortal god continent. In the end, it was too large. Nor could anyone clearly explain how many vortexes or floating land masses existed. However, everyone knew that wherever vortexes existed in the vast expanse, civilizations could be found. Even if they were extinct, evidence would remain of their existence, remnants that could give a glimpse into their former glory. As for the land masses that floated about, they were always places of great danger, locations of either powerful experts or the shades of the dead. However, the vast expanse was so large that the space between such land masses was incredible. It was even possible to travel for tens upon tens of thousands of years and never run into a single one. As for the immortal god continent and the devil realm, they had traveled far and wide within the vast expanse. Although they had never traveled far enough to grasp the overall shape of the vast expanse, whenever they encountered other forces, they always came out on top. In fact, they knew much more about this newly appeared vortex than most others would. Almost as soon as the immortal god continent appeared, the voice of a woman echoed out from the landmass, passing through the vast expanse into the ears of the people standing on the back of the butterfly. There are 3 restricted areas within the vast expanse, mysterious locations within which lurk profound secrets relating to the creation of the vast expanse itself. The place you are traveling toward is one of those 3. It is called the Green Coffin Vortex. Xianxia's expression was one of vigilance. Standing next to him was the paragon puppet, which had been reduced to a very simple state of consciousness due to Meng Hao being in a coma. Wang Yaokai was also present, as were Jai Yin and others, such as the mountain and sea lords and Qi Jiusi. These people were the most powerful experts in the mountain and sea realm. They were guarding Meng Hao, and as such, their faces were grim as they stared out at the immortal god continent. The woman's voice echoed out once more. Choosing to go to a place like that is essentially choosing to die. Even as she spoke, certain cultivators from the immortal god continent were flying out into the vast expanse. Some of those cultivators were like suns and emanated shocking fluctuations. In the rear position was the same cold woman who had appeared back in the mountain and sea realm, whose cultivation base fluctuations were those of the 9 essences level. She was the one who had just spoken. According to the legends, she continued, the black and white vortex which spins there outside the green coffin vortex contains a Tao of time. It is a great Tao that did not just appear randomly. It was forcibly acquired and left there to feed the woman inside the coffin. As for who exactly that woman is, nobody knows. Years ago, my husband came here and observed this place for a long time, and in the end said only one thing. He said that the person in that coffin is the origin of the starry sky that became the vast expanse. Eventually, the 9 essences woman's eyes came to rest on Meng Hao, who was unconscious on the back of the butterfly. We have reached the point where the hostilities should cease. There is no need for you to proceed any further. Our entire purpose for starting this war was, first, to prevent the rise of the immortal, and second, to acquire a mirror. The woman looked at the butterfly, her expression cold as she said, the funny thing is that both of those reasons were originally unconnected, but now they are inexorably intertwined. Just hand that man over and allow yourselves to be sealed. Then, you can be on your way. In the starry sky of the vast expanse, 9 essences paragons are the most powerful of beings. If you want to stay alive in the vast expanse, then no matter where you go, you will need a 9 essences paragon. Her words caused incredible pressure to weigh down on the vast expanse, and left the butterfly trembling and incapable of moving. Do you people disagree? A moment later, the woman waved her right hand, causing an incredible force to surge down. Just when she was about to take a step forward, her heart suddenly thumped as she realized that Meng Hao had just twitched. Is he waking up? She thought, smiling, her eyes glittering coldly. How amusing. I'm also curious to see the true strength of this immortal who became the demon. She pointed out at the butterfly. Don't leave a single one alive. As the words left her mouth, the surrounding cultivators of the immortal god continent charged in attack. The 4 suns radiated boundless light as they shot toward the butterfly, closing in almost instantly. Sadness appeared on Xianxia's face, and everyone else had bloodshot eyes. As the cultivators of the immortal god continent closed in, a beam of light shot out from the butterfly, a divine ability which transformed into a shield. However, it could only protect them for a moment before it began to crumble and collapse. At that point, Xianxia launched himself forward to attack, along with Wang Yaokai, the paragon puppet, and everyone else. Zappy note from Deathblade. Maybe it was my mood when I was translating the past couple chapters or something else, but for some reason I was unusually upset by Sea Dream's death. I couldn't help but feel how tragic it was that someone so powerful, someone who had lived so long, seen so many things, could have such negative feelings, even when sacrificing herself to save the day. I kind of wished I could reach out to her in her final moment and say, no, you're not useless. She might not have killed anyone in the fighting or concocted some super complex plan, but she worked hard, she endured, and in the end, she actually saved the day. At a certain point in life, all of us find ourselves in the situation where we feel inadequate or lacking, but we should never let that get the best of us. Poor Sea Dream. R.I.P. Chapter 1401. Wake up, wake up. You won't withstand a single blow. The 4 paragons in the suns were the quickest. One of them was a crimson-haired middle-aged man with a cold smile. As he strode forward, he waved his hand, resulting in Xianxia and the others coughing up mouthfuls of blood as they spun backward beyond control. A few of them even directly exploded. It took only a moment for it to be apparent that there was nothing the mountain and sea cultivators could do to block the advance. It was simply impossible to compare the mountain and sea realm and the butterfly to the immortal god continent. The crimson-haired man strode forward and stepped onto the butterfly itself, causing a tremor to run through it. He instantly headed toward the unconscious Meng Hao, and a flicker of scorn could be seen in his eyes as he reached his hand out to grab the top of his head. At the same time, the other sons and other cultivators of the immortal god continent were closing in. In only a moment, they would burst into the world which contained the survivors of the mountain and sea realm and put them all to death. In the moment in which the crimson-haired man was about to grab Meng Hao, the butterfly's wings shivered, and Meng Hao's parents suddenly appeared to block his way. "You think a bit too much of yourselves," the man said, smiling. His energy surged, transforming into a powerful attack which headed directly toward Meng Hao's parents to wipe them out of existence. The destructive power in his hand was enough to eradicate anything and everything, and it was now only moments away from slamming into Meng Hao. It was absolutely a moment of incredible danger. The crisis Meng Hao faced was being shared by his parents, by Xianxia and the others, and by everyone living inside the world of the butterfly. Meanwhile, in the world inside Meng Hao's mind, lightning and thunder crashed. At the same time, countless copies of Meng Hao were joining their voices together to shout out in a powerful roar. "Wake up, wake up, wake up!" As the voices echoed out endlessly, more and more versions of Meng Hao appeared, filling the entire world, roaring at him in an attempt to awaken him. It eventually pierced into the remaining cultivation base C, entering the ears of Meng Hao's true self, causing him to tremble. Then his eyes opened. Meanwhile, back out in the real world, where Meng Hao lay on the butterfly's back, his eyes also opened. As his bright red pupils appeared, an explosive aura surged out, causing the vast expanse to shake and the starry sky to tremble. Shockingly, as everything quaked around him, lightning bolts appeared, transforming the area into a lake of lightning. It almost looked as if the vast expanse itself were furious. An intense pressure began to weigh down that was difficult to put into words. It filled the entire area, crushing down onto the cultivators from the immortal god continent who were attempting to break into the butterfly world. All of them coughed up blood, and then uncontrollably dropped to their knees and began to kowtow. Even the 8 essences paragons were shocked to find that they were trembling. The entire world was completely shaken. The starry sky was vibrating, and the vast expanse was howling. The immortal god cultivators who were trying to cut down Xianxia and the others felt their cultivation bases weakening, and then some of them began to explode. And that was what happened when Meng Hao merely opened his eyes and unleashed his energy. The intensity of the power caused the face of the cold-eyed 9 essences paragon to drop. As for the crimson-haired man in front of Meng Hao, his scalp was completely numb, and he was shaking in his boots. His cultivation base was unstable, and the attack he had just unleashed on Meng Hao's parents was completely destroyed. An indescribably majestic air radiated off of Meng Hao, causing everything around him to vibrate. Crimson-haired man, who was an 8 essences paragon son from the immortal god continent, couldn't stop himself from looking at Meng Hao. As soon as their eyes met, the man's face fell, and his mind began to spin. It felt like red daggers were stabbing through his eyes into his brain. Any resistance on his part was crushed like twigs as the pain stabbed into him, sending his sea of consciousness boiling, causing his cultivation base to grow unstable and filling him with a sensation of imminent death. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and his entire body shook violently as he subconsciously took a step back in fear of the complete and utter bizarreness of Meng Hao. In the moment he fell back, Meng Hao took a step forward, and before the man could dodge, viciously head-butted him in the forehead. Meng Hao's eyes were bright red as he slammed into the man, instantly turning the top of his head into a mash of blood and gore. He screamed and struggled, but then Meng Hao smiled and once again butted his head forward. "Didn't you just say that we wouldn't withstand a single blow?" He grabbed the man's robe and slammed his head into him again. "Didn't you just say that we overestimate ourselves?" Meng Hao grinned, and blood soaked his head as he bashed it into the man over and over again. Finally, the 8 essences paragon's head exploded and his body was destroyed. His nascent divinity flew out, looking at Meng Hao in shock. Meng Hao let the man's nascent divinity fly away and turned to look at the other forces who had already landed on the butterfly, then waved his hand furiously. "Screw off," he growled. Rumbling sounds erupted out as the lightning surrounding him sent the midst of the vast expanse seething. Incredible pressure radiated out from Meng Hao, and shocking power filled his voice. Instantly, the cultivators from the immortal god continent who were on the butterfly coughed up blood, and then began to explode one after another. In the end, not a single one could remain on the butterfly's back. The immortal god continent was buzzing as countless cultivators flew out, eyes filled with disbelief as they stared at Meng Hao. In addition to the original 9 Essences female paragon, there was also the white-robed, white-eyebrowed old man who had fought Taoist immortal ancient, and who was now looking at Meng Hao with a very serious expression. He's 9 Essences. Those were the words coming out of the mouths of the bedraggled cultivators who had survived their brush with Meng Hao's power. That's that 9 Essences power. How is that even possible? How could he be 9 Essences? Shui Dongliu used immortal Dao transference to consecrate him, but even if he passed on everything to this guy, it's not likely that he would be able to have 9 Essences power. Most importantly, you can tell that he's actually not finished with the process. If he ever completely absorbs that legacy, just think of how strong he'll be. The cultivators of the immortal god continent felt as if they had been struck in the head. Their minds were spinning as they looked at Meng Hao with complete disbelief. 9 Essences. Only 9 Essences could possess energy like this, and only 9 Essences could destroy the fleshly body of an 8 Essences paragon as easily as flipping over a hand. Only 9 Essences could allow a faction to stand firm and unthreatened within the vast expanse. Shui Dongliu killed himself as the price to give Meng Hao unmatchable good fortune. That was not only to pay back the debt he owed to the Fang clan, it was also to ensure that someone remained behind after he died to protect the mountain and sea realm. And that was the exact role which he had chosen Meng Hao to play, the guardian of the mountain and sea realm. His eyes glowed red as he slowly turned and looked at the hosts of cultivators from the immortal god continent. His sudden appearance on the scene left Kasidigarbha and the other forces on the butterfly stirred and excited. Meng Hao's parents appeared, along with Su Qing and others from within the world of the butterfly. All of them were paying close attention to Meng Hao. Meng Hao stood in front of the group tall, his hair floating around him, looking as powerful as a mountain. Behind him on the butterfly were his parents, Fang Yu, Su Qing, and other friends and family, the few surviving cultivators from the mountain and sea realm. Facing Meng Hao was the vast and boundless immortal god continent, as well as a seemingly never-ending force of cultivators. There were multiple 8 Essences paragons, countless imperial lords, as well as 2 paramount figures who were the pillars of their army, the 2 9 Essences paragons. Meng Hao looked at them, his seething demonic qi causing the mists of the vast expanse around him to recede, the starlight to gleam. Seemingly endless amounts of demonic qi flowed out of him, and at the same time, his cultivation base continued to rise. Before accepting Shui Dongliu's legacy, he had been capable of fighting with paragons. Then he became the demon and his battle prowess had increased dramatically, to the point where he could battle 8 Essences paragons. But now, thanks to the preeminent good fortune given him, his hexing magics were complete. Although he was missing the 9th hex in some ways, his collection could be considered finished. Then there was the cultivation base and essence power from Shui Dongliu, which helped him to advance by leaps and bounds. Finally, there were his extinguished soul lamps, which pushed him even higher. As of this moment he had battle prowess that was no weaker than the 9 Essences level. With all of that, Meng Hao still hadn't reached his peak. He still had room for progress with his cultivation base. He still had more than 10 soul lamps which had not been extinguished. He had yet to create his 9th hex, and although all of the other hexing magics had essence to some degree or another, he still needed more enlightenment. One could only imagine how powerful he would be when he reached the true pinnacle. It would be something incomparable even to his current power. After all, he was the demon. He had transformed from being an immortal to being the demon. There is a god who is the acme of all gods. There is a devil who is the ultimate expression of devils. There is also an immortal who is like an emperor among immortals. And there is also the demon, the pinnacle of all demons. As of this moment, the vast expanse was completely silent. Demonic qi rolled out of Meng Hao as he stood there, looking coldly at the crowds from the immortal god continent. A smile twisted the corner of his mouth, a brutal smile which caused icy cold to fill the hearts of anyone who looked at it. No one spoke. Even the 9 Essences female paragon looked at him with cold, flickering eyes. Then she took a step forward and Meng Hao smiled. He reached up and pushed down onto his forehead, causing a group of mountains and seas to fly out. 9 mountains, 8 seas. It was the mountain and sea realm. As of this moment, he held the mountain and sea realm in his hands. Chapter 1402, I shall possess the mountains and seas. Meng Hao had the mountain and sea realm in his hands. He flung it out, simultaneously sending his mind and will into it. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the mountain and sea realm grand aegis appeared, surrounding, not Meng Hao, but the butterfly. It enveloped the butterfly, protecting it along with all of Meng Hao's relatives and friends. Then Meng Hao took a step forward and transformed into a beam of light that shot directly toward the icy nine essences paragon. As they closed in on each other, performing incantation gestures the whole time, the domineering aura radiating off of Meng Hao grew even more intense, and he looked more ferocious than ever. Moments later, the intense sounds of battle filled the void of the vast expanse. A boom rang out, and then they separated. A split second later, they were once again locked in fierce combat. Meng Hao waved his hand to summon numerous mountains. He transformed into an azure rock, which radiated a bizarre energy that made it seem like a true demon as it screamed in for an attack. Shockwaves blasted out in all directions. Grinning, Meng Hao performed an incantation gesture and unleashed hexing magic. The eighth hex erupted out, and the wave of his finger caused the icy woman to stop in place for a moment. In that instant, Meng Hao's seventh hex appeared. Next was the sixth hex, the fifth hex, and the fourth hex. A world of black and white appeared, which encompassed countless ages of reincarnation. A great Tao of time appeared that could transform the vast expanse. The icy woman's face flickered, and the white-robed, white-eyebrowed old man took a threatening step forward. At the same time, the old man's voice rang out in all directions. "Destroy the world butterfly." The surrounding immortal god cultivators hesitated for a moment before resuming their charge. Under the leadership of the eight essences paragons, they began to batter the shield. Booms echoed out as Meng Hao single-handedly fought against two nine essences paragons. Blood sprayed out of his mouth, and as he fell back, the lightning cauldron appeared above his head. Electricity danced as he switched positions with one of the immortal god cultivators. When he reappeared, he was right next to an immortal god imperial lord. His hand instantly shot out, and the imperial lord let out a scream as Meng Hao's fingers stabbed into his eyes. Meng Hao unleashed curse power to imprison his soul, then dug his eyes out of his head, grabbed his body, and lifted it over his head. Next, he physically threw him toward an eight essences paragon who was charging toward him from off to the side. A boom rang out, and the eight essences paragon was shaken, but only a moment later, he was closing in on Meng Hao. "Screw off," he roared, unleashing divine abilities and essence power. However, in the same moment, Meng Hao vanished yet again, appearing unexpectedly next to another eight essences paragon. His aura was different this time, brutally violent, and as he pounced on the paragon, black fog rolled out, covering the two of them. A blood-curdling scream rang out, and even as the icy paragon hastened over, the fog faded away. Meng Hao was nowhere to be seen, but the eight essences paragon's remains were left behind, mangled and ripped apart as if by a wild animal. Meng Hao appeared off in the distance, holding the man's nascent divinity in his hand. Eyes flickering with crimson light, he popped it into his mouth and began to chew slowly. Then he reached out with his right hand, and the vast expanse trembled as the battle weapon suddenly appeared. It was not pitch black this time, but rather bright red. In fact, if you looked closely, you would see that Meng Hao's hair was no longer black, but violet. Furthermore, the roots of his hair were actually red. Despite the vast force arrayed against him, Meng Hao had killed several people in quick succession, which left the icy female paragon very grim-faced. To the majestic immortal god continent, killing a nine essences paragon wasn't anything incredibly difficult, and yet Meng Hao was so bizarre and multifarious that it was impossible to lock him down. It was at this point that a beam of light brimming with insane destructive power shot out from the immortal god continent, piercing through the vast expanse, cleaving apart the starry sky, destroying natural laws as it bore down on Meng Hao. The fluctuations from the beam of light were otherworldly, causing Meng Hao's eyes to widen. It was impossible to tell what had emitted the light, but it didn't seem to have come from a cultivator. The bizarre sensation it gave off was palpable. Without any hesitation, Meng Hao performed a form displacement transposition and vanished. The position he had just occupied in the starry sky suddenly shattered and transformed into a black hole. All of the cultivators who were nearby were instantly transformed into ash. Meng Hao's eyes flickered toward a certain mountain peak on the immortal god continent, upon which was a vicious-looking war chariot. What made him frown even more was that somewhere there on the immortal god continent, he could sense two more nine essences auras. It was at this point that another beam of light rocketed out, and this time it was heading, not for Meng Hao, but for the mountain and sea realm grand aegis. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the grand aegis collapsed. And yet, in that same moment, Meng Hao performed a double-handed incantation gesture. "Mountain and sea seal," he said, causing the collapsed fragments of the grand aegis to sweep together and envelope the nearby immortal god cultivators, where it turned into a shocking sealing mark. It even enveloped the cold woman and the white-haired old man. In the moment the seal formed, Meng Hao flashed into motion, returning to the butterfly. "Let's go," he said. The butterfly's wings flapped, and as they sped along, Meng Hao looked back coldly at the immortal god continent and the group stuck in the sealing mark. Flicking his sleeve, he sent the mountains and seas out in front of him in formation. "When someone hits you," he growled, "you hit back." A mysterious, incisive light appeared in his blood-colored pupils as he said, "The Tao is in my heart." A light shone out like an icy blade. He raised his hands into the air and splayed them wide. A strange resonance could be heard in his voice, which caused the 9 mountains and 8 seas to suddenly increase dramatically in size. The mountains grew larger, and the seas churned. In the blink of an eye, the 9 mountains in front of him were completely and utterly shocking, the ultimate depictions of any type of mountain. Each and every one of those mountains was a world unto itself, and radiated a sharp and incisive will. Years and years ago, Paragon 9 seals used this same precious treasure to destroy the heaven-trampling bridge, to fend off the immortal god continent and the devil realm, and prevent those 2 powers from harming the survivors from the Paragon immortal realm. Now in Meng Hao's hands, the mountain and sea realm erupted, with the true power which it held within. 9 majestic mountains were like 9 swords that could shake heaven and earth. As the power of those mountains radiated out, the faces of the crowds from the immortal god continent fell. The cold woman trapped in the mountain and sea seal looked on with constricting pupils, and the white-robed old man was clearly shocked. Immediately, they began to confer. "I can't believe that Shui Dongliu's legacy contains the secret to controlling the mountain and sea realm. Impossible. Back when 9 seals died, he managed to send out a discarnate soul. He used his death to completely rock us, shaking our foundation to the point where we couldn't destroy the mountain and sea realm. However, even at that time, we were able to join forces to destroy the magic he used to control the mountain and sea realm. There isn't anyone who can truly control the mountain and sea realm, that terrifying conglomeration of the fury of the immortals. Not even 9 seals, discarnate soul within Shui Dongliu, was able to do anything other than exercise basic control." Even as these 2 paragons were reeling in shock, Meng Hao waved his hands, and his eyes flickered with intense focus, with a deep longing for the mountain and sea realm, and with a deep hatred for the enemy. "The will is in my eyes." His cultivation base erupted with power as the second sentence left his mouth. Simultaneously, the 8 seas began to churn and seethe, and in the blink of an eye they had become seas of stars which shook the vast expanse. They merged with the 9 mountains to erupt with indescribable pressure. The instant that pressure appeared, the hosts from the immortal god continent coughed up mouthfuls of blood, and even the land mass itself began to quiver. Mountains fell into ruin, and the courses of rivers altered. One city after another on the land mass collapsed into rubble. It was like the end of days. This was the true power of the precious treasure that was the mountain and sea realm. Meng Hao had not acquired this magical control method from the legacy of Shui Dongliu. That legacy had given him ordinary magical techniques from the mountain and sea realm, and nothing that could help him exceed Shui Dongliu. But what he did have was the Seal the Heavens incantation. When he had unleashed that incantation within the mountains and seas, it led to incredible power. However, at that time, the mountain and sea realm had still been under the general control of Shui Dongliu, which made it difficult for Meng Hao to use it. In fact, back then, it was almost useless. It was only later that he came to understand that the true Seal the Heavens incantation could only be used properly after he had become the lord of the mountain and sea realm, and returned the mountains and seas to the form of a magical item. Like now, this was the Seal the Heavens incantation. It had been created by his master in the 8th mountain and sea, a divine ability or Tao that was the laughing stock of the masses. And yet, that magical technique was no simple divine ability, it was actually a control method for the entire mountain and sea realm. The correct way to use it was not against a cultivator, but on the mountain and sea realm itself, to unleash its truly deadly aspects as a precious treasure. No one knew what experiences the noble Ran had gone through to create this particular divine ability. After its creation, he had spent the rest of his life extolling its virtues. In the end, he passed it on to Meng Hao, who eventually proved that the Seal the Heavens incantation was not a worthless incantation. After the true war of the mountain and sea realm broke out, Meng Hao never ran into the noble Ran again. In fact, now that he thought back, it seemed as if the noble Ran hadn't even been present during the fighting. However, now was not the time to contemplate that matter. Meng Hao waved his arms, and the mountains and seas erupted with shocking pressure. He took a deep breath as he suddenly understood what it meant to say, "The Tao is in my heart." That Tao referred not to essence, not to natural laws, nor to magical laws. It was shapeless and existed in the heart, and it didn't matter if you were demon or immortal. It was all the same. The Tao is one's heart, and however deep your heart was, that was how profound your Tao would be. Furthermore, he now understood that the will is in my eyes referred to the outer manifestation of the Tao. Whatever he looked at, had a Tao or was a Tao. I shall possess the mountains and seas. He flicked his sleeve, and the 9 mountains rumbled as they tilted on their side to point toward the immortal god continent. Chapter 1403, The Supreme Seal the Heavens Incantation. The 8 seas erupted with power. Although they were clearly seas, the shocking power seemed like flames of madness that spread out in all directions. The mist of the vast expanse shied away as a huge whirlwind sprang up. In the moment that the whirlwind appeared, a terrifying aura began to spread out, causing all living beings who sensed it to tremble inwardly. At the same time, 2 figures emerged from the immortal god continent. They were 2 old men, both of whom radiated the demeanors of celestial beings. The entire immortal god continent was astir now. Countless cultivators were meditating to build up energy, and the entire land mass was like a giant awakening from slumber. Countless shield layers sprang up. In almost an instant, incredible defenses were in place. At the same time, the eyes of the enormous statue in the middle of the land mass suddenly began to shine brightly. It was at this point that Meng Hao stretched his hands out and spoke out the final words of his incantation. Seal the Heavens incantation. He roared the words at the top of his lungs, and at the same time, his cultivation base erupted. His demonic chi flowed out to merge with the mountains and seas, causing a shocking development to occur. As the 9 mountains and 8 seas hovered there in the vast expanse, an enormous figure took shape, a figure whose face was Meng Hao's. However, that figure also sported a wicked horn protruding from the top of his head, making him completely shocking to behold. He seemed to be both laughing and not laughing, crying and not crying. Anyone who saw him would feel coldness rising up from deep within the heart. Even the mist of the vast expanse shot away in all directions, not willing to come into contact with him. Explosive rage and bizarre evil filled the aura that emanated off of the illusory figure, to an extent which vastly exceeded Meng Hao's own aura. Meng Hao then viciously shoved out with both hands, sending the astonishing 9 mountains toward the immortal god continent. The 8 seas rumbled as they spun in the form of a vortex. As that vortex grew in size, it was possible to see the images of countless souls within the seas, vicious and thirsty for blood. As for the enormous figure which existed above all of them, he seemed to be wielding the mountains and seas themselves in a powerful attack. The sight was completely shocking, and if someone could paint the image, it would be something people assumed was a myth from primordial times. It was almost as if that figure were treating the mountains as a mount, and the seas as his demon weapon to slaughter the starry sky. The immortal god continent trembled, and the sealed cultivators had looks of astonishment written on their faces as they let out shouts of shock. In the blink of an eye, one of the mountains, the 5th mountain, actually stabbed into the sealed area, leaving behind a trail of blood as it shot toward the immortal god continent. Next were the 4th and 6th mountains, then the 3rd and 7th mountains. Amidst the rumbling, the 9 mountains looked like 9 spikes that pierced through everything. The immortal god continent's 4 9 essences paragons managed to stop 1 mountain each, but that left 3 mountains which smashed into the structure of the immortal god continent. The vast expanse shook as a massive roaring sound ripped out. The defensive shields twisted and distorted as all power was called upon to aid the defense. Countless people were shrieking, and miserable screams rang out everywhere. The land mass trembled as if Judgment Day had arrived. The cultivators there were now experiencing the same madness that had been unleashed countless years ago by 9 seals when he wielded the mountain and sea realm. As the 9 mountains blasted forward, the 8 seas, in the form of a demon weapon, hurtled toward the land mass. When the last mountain pierced the defensive shields, the immortal god continent's defenses were broken. The lands quaked, and rifts spread out everywhere across the landmass. But then, the eyes of the statue in the middle of the entire land mass flickered. A terrifying pressure erupted out, unleashing a shockwave that instantly filled the entire area. When it passed over the 9 mountains, they shattered. The 8 seas were destroyed. And yet, they didn't vanish, but instead transformed into countless bits of rubble which rained down onto the immortal god continent. The cultivators on the immortal god continent began to cry out with furious roars. Meng Hao watched all of this happening from his position on the butterfly, and could see the flickering light in the eyes of the statue. "These gods are half immortal, huh?" he murmured. His heart was filled with vigilance as the butterfly flew away urgently. His connection to the mountain and sea realm remained. He was the one and only owner of the precious treasure, and that could not be wrested away from him. As such, the mountains and seas did not truly vanish. Although they had just been destroyed moments later, they reappeared in front of him, the same 9 mountains and 8 seas as before. As Meng Hao stood there on the butterfly, flying off into the distance, an angered roar echoed out from the immortal god continent, which was from none other than the icy female paragon. Her murderous aura skyrocketed as she instantly gave chase. "I've experienced the pain of watching flames of war engulf my home," Meng Hao said. "Unfortunately for you, all of that is just beginning." He smiled slightly, then extended his hand and pointed toward the mountains and seas. Instantly, the mountains and seas shrank down and converged upon each other to form the mountain and sea bow. He held the bow in his left hand and drew the string back with his right. Killing intent flickered in his eyes as the energy of the bow surged, and the power of the mountains and seas transformed into an arrow. When he loosed the string, that arrow shot forth like a thunderbolt. But then, without even pausing for a moment, Meng Hao drew the bow again and shot a second arrow, and then a third. 3 arrows can kill gods. 4 arrows can cut down immortals. 5 arrows are heaven-defying. 5 arrows, 5 beams of light. They transformed into a sea of brightness which distorted the vast expanse as they rumbled along. They contained a will of extermination, and Meng Hao's killing intent, with boundless demonic qi. Instantly, they appeared in front of the cold female paragon, and were moving with such speed that it was difficult to put into words, so fast that she was incapable of evading. Based on Meng Hao's current battle prowess, wielding the mountain and sea bow in this way allowed him to unleash power that even this cold woman feared. At the same time, it was a difficult thing for Meng Hao to use the bow for a sustained period of time. Rumbling could be heard as the woman waved her sleeve. Since she couldn't move in any direction, she decided that she might as well give up any ideas of dodging. Performing an incantation gesture, she caused a towering iciness to spread out from her, freezing the starry sky and the vast expanse. Layers of ice built up around her, from within which she glared at Meng Hao standing there on the butterfly. When their gazes met, the layers of ice expanded outward, instantly coming into contact with the 5 light arrows. Unexpectedly, the ice didn't shatter, but actually spread out to envelop the 5 arrows. At the same time, the layers of ice expanded outward to form the image of a woman's hand, which stretched out toward the butterfly as if to grab it. From a distance, the sight was completely shocking. The ice hand almost seemed capable of plucking away stars or moons. The vast expanse shook violently as the hand suddenly appeared right behind the butterfly. Meng Hao stood on the butterfly, coldly observing this enormous hand of ice. Then, a smile appeared on his face, as if he didn't care about it at all. As the ice hand closed in, what appeared to be the beginnings of layers of ice started to form around the butterfly. By this point, the ice hand was only about 300 meters away from Meng Hao. However, the 5 light arrows which had been locked down earlier could only be suppressed for so long. Suddenly, they exploded, sending dazzling light out and ripping numerous rifts open within the ice hand. That in turn made it impossible for the hand to reach Meng Hao, and it finally shattered. As that happened, the dazzling light caused by the explosion of the 5 arrows sent powerful ripples out in all directions, obscuring the area between Meng Hao and the woman, making it impossible for them to see each other. The ripples eventually faded away, but by that time the butterfly was gone. As for the icy paragon, her face was grim as she looked off into the distance, the killing intent in her eyes growing more and more intense. At the same time, the white-robed, white-eyebrowed old man, as well as 2 other ancient and profound-looking individuals stood there together, looking silently off into the distance. "Perhaps our plan was mistaken," If the patriarch knew about what we were doing in this war, he might not approve. It's useless to jabber like that. If we get our hands on that mirror, we can call him back. Besides, the immortal is above the god and can suppress the devil. That saying has been floating around for a long time. The fact that the immortal could become the demon is something that anyone could have predicted might happen. The demon, the female paragon sighed, then gave a cold harumph. It doesn't matter. Now that things have reached this point, we can't just give up. He might have battle prowess equivalent to the 9 essences level, but he won't be the first such person we've killed throughout the years. After him. She waved her sleeve, and after a bit of time passed, the immortal god continent began to once again rumble through the vast expanse in the direction Meng Hao had fled in. This time, it moved even faster than before, as if they were unleashing some incredible power that had remained untapped before. That power pushed the land mass forward with speed that defied imagination. The immortal god continent had been building up resources for countless years, giving them a profound level of power that was enough to shake anyone in the vast expanse. What they had revealed so far was only a tiny portion of that. Their true resources came in the form of people who had existed since that ancient generation and had even been famous back then. For example, there was a tiny country that existed somewhere in the recesses of the immortal god continent. It was a city-state that was not very large, with a population that couldn't be considered huge. However, its monarch was a kind man, and that country was called the State of Clear Water. In another area, in the capital city of a vast empire, a huge, muscular man sat in the imperial palace, gulping down alcohol and watching a dance performance. Although he was laughing heartily, there was a certain melancholy within him. 1. After talking with Rex, the translator of Renegade Immortal, we came to the conclusion that this character is likely Sidhu Nan, who appears in name as early as chapter 47. The immortal god continent sped through the boundless vast expanse. Far up ahead of them, also within the vast expanse, was a writhing black mist. Within that mist were several enormous butterflies, which were speeding along, dragging a land mass behind them. Visible upon that land mass was a gigantic coffin, which was surrounded by countless Coutwing individuals who were chanting scriptures. As the sound of the scriptures floated out, endless roaring could also be heard. It transformed into a maddening power, as well as a savage, barbaric feeling that spread out in all directions. That land mass was also speeding along as fast as it could. Expand. As the butterfly flew along, Meng Hao stood there on its back, blood oozing out of his mouth. Although he had seemed impressively mighty in the fight just now, the truth was that his cultivation base was unstable, a result of being interrupted during the process of absorbing the good fortune from Shui Dongliu. He was still incapable of entering the world within the butterfly. He wasn't sure exactly why, but whenever he tried to enter the wings, the butterfly would begin to tremble on the verge of collapse. As the wings of the butterfly, Meng Hao's parents looked into the matter, as did K. Siddhigarbha and others. They came to the conclusion that Meng Hao's aura was currently incompatible with the butterfly because of not having completely absorbed Shui Dongliu's good fortune. After the process was complete and his various auras were in balance, there should be a way to enter. That matter in and of itself wasn't of great concern and didn't affect Meng Hao's ability to defend the butterfly. Therefore, he sat cross-legged on its back, looking out at the vast expanse, an expression of reminiscence occasionally appearing on his face. He thought back to the mountain and sea realm, to Shui Dongliu, and to all the faces he remembered from there. The pain in his heart was hard to suppress. It was true that his parents hadn't perished and some of his relatives had survived. There was even hope for the long-term survival of the mountain and sea realm. But when he recalled the past, he almost wished that the present could be nothing more than a mere dream. It caused him to sigh deep in his heart. He didn't understand why things had turned out this way, but that didn't matter. His only option was to do everything he could to protect the butterfly as it continued to head toward the location Paragon C. Dream had discovered at the cost of her life. That is where the hope of survival exists. Looking off into the distance, he could just barely make out an enormous black and white vortex, within which swirled a Tao of time. Inside the world of the butterfly, the surviving remnants of the mountain and sea realm quietly went about creating a new home for themselves. Of the entire mountain and sea realm, only a few 100,000 cultivators remained. Those cultivators had fought a bitter war, had watched their society crumble, and had gone through countless heartaches. And yet, they were as focused as ever. Their spirits had not been extinguished, and if things went on, that spirit would be passed down to countless future generations. At times, Su Qing emerged to accompany Meng Hao. Wang Yaokai, Fatty, and others also came out. Chen Fan didn't appear. Meng Hao clearly remembered him being among the group transported into the world of the butterfly, but later he was nowhere to be found. After pondering the matter, he recalled how he had caught a glimpse of Chen Fan leaving the 33 hells, and the confusion which had been visible in his eyes. Apparently, Chen Fan had encountered something within the 33 hells that was a good fortune unique to him. In the past, Meng Hao might have attempted to investigate the matter, but now, the people of the mountain and sea realm were physically and mentally exhausted, and Meng Hao himself didn't have the energy to think about it too much. Patriarch Reliance was there in the world of the butterfly, as were Pill Demon and Ki Jiusi. Time passed. While the people went about constructing their new home, Meng Hao sat cross-legged on the back of the butterfly. He didn't slip into a meditative trance, nor did he practice cultivation. Instead, he kept his divine sense focused on his surroundings and remained constantly on guard. The danger was still far from over. He could sense that two powerful energies had locked onto the butterfly. One of them was further up ahead, mysterious and unfathomable. That was no doubt the devil realm, which still had yet to lay eyes on. Behind them was the pulsing killing intent of the immortal god continent. As the two land masses drew closer, it was as if a huge net had been stretched out, which was now closing in over the butterfly. However, the two land masses couldn't precisely pinpoint the location of the butterfly. Meng Hao's demonic qi distorted everything, making that impossible. Were it not for that, he was certain that they would teleport over within moments. Meng Hao sat there quietly as the butterfly got closer and closer to the vortex which held hope for the mountain and sea realm. As the journey continued, Meng Hao was able to peer out into the vast expanse for the first time ever, and he saw many strange and bizarre things. At one point, he saw what appeared to be a swarm of broken statues, whose faces were impossible to make out, flying along. It was only at first glance that they looked like statues. Upon closer examination, it became clear that they were some sort of strange life form. Thankfully, they didn't appear to be malicious, and didn't even spare a glance for Meng Hao and the butterfly as they flew off into the distance. Another time, Meng Hao's eyes snapped open when he sensed something completely shocking. Looking up, he saw that, not too far off in the vast expanse, a wriggling mist had appeared. Bursts of intense coldness pulsed off of it as it began to follow the butterfly. Moments later, gray eyes appeared within the mist. When they realized that Meng Hao's crimson eyes were staring back at them and sensed the malice within his gaze, the mist fell back and then faded away. Meng Hao frowned. The mist gave him a very strange sensation, as though there were countless life forms within it. He also had the feeling that if it weren't for the 9 essences pressure within him, the mist would have continued to follow the butterfly, waiting for a chance to pounce on it in attack. Those were only some of the bizarre entities which Meng Hao saw in the vast expanse as they traveled along. He also saw a pack of wolves. They were real wolves, just like wolves from the mortal world, except that they lurked within the vast expanse. To them, the vast expanse was a forest that made up their habitat. He saw the corpse of a giant, which had long since begun to rot, and was being slowly eaten by a horde of countless disembodied heads. Among those heads were men and women, young and old, all of whom were slowly gnawing away at the corpse. This giant was different from the three-eyed god, or the god tribe of the immortal god continent. It had 2 heads and a long tail. More than half of it had been consumed, but by looking at its bones, it was possible to tell that in life it had been comparable to an 8 essences expert. When Meng Hao neared, the head stopped chewing and slowly looked over at the butterfly with cold, detached eyes. However, as soon as they caught sight of Meng Hao, strange expressions could be seen, and they quickly turned back to eating. Some things were quite fear-inspiring, but there were other things which Meng Hao simply didn't understand. At one point, he saw a stone palace floating out in the vast expanse. Upon passing it, eyes popped open upon the stones which made up the palace. They looked curiously at Meng Hao, and at the same time, the sound of countless shouting voices could be heard. "Damn it, you're squishing me. That hurts, ow." "Shut up, I've always been on top of you. It's not like I want it that way. There's somebody on top of me who's squishing me too." "Ah, I've been turned into a stone. This is so weird." Apparently, the arguing voices came from the stones themselves, which continued to squabble as the palace floated off into the distance. Eventually, the butterfly got so close to the vortex that it was possible to say that it had actually arrived at its final destination. It was then that a person suddenly appeared. This was the first time a human had appeared within the vast expanse. It was an old man in a woven rush raincoat who sat cross-legged on a boulder, floating there in the vast expanse. That boulder had eyes, and it was currently shouting out in a rage. "You damned old codger, get off me, you're not allowed to sit on me. Ag, this is a disgrace. This is a humiliation. I don't even have a husband yet, that's it. We're fighting to the death, you and I." As the boulder screamed, the old man snorted coldly and continued to dangle his fishing pole out into the vast expanse. As the butterfly passed by, Meng Hao assumed that this entity would be like all the others, that it would merely look over and then ignore him. However, it was in that moment that the butterfly trembled and changed course, to head toward the hook dangling from the old man's fishing line. Meng Hao's eyes flickered, and he shot to his feet. Even as he sent his divine sense out, he heard his parents' voices echoing in his mind. "Hayar, we've lost control of the butterfly." The redness of Meng Hao's eyes increased in intensity, and his demonic qi roiled as he stared at the old man. The old man looked up at Meng Hao and smiled. It was a strange smile, and even as it touched his face, his forehead split open and a black horn jutted out. His body continued to split, and soon his whole body was covered with cracks. Then his body exploded, revealing a green figure with a solitary horn. He pulsed with a chaotic aura, and as he looked at Meng Hao, he began to laugh uproariously. When the vast expanse is thrown into chaos, heaven and earth will once again be at hand. When the universe collapses, the great Tao will reappear, who will be above the god and the devil, to seal the heavens. So this is what it was all leading up to. So that's how it was. The green-colored entity laughed, then abruptly pointed out at the butterfly. "Ah, well, since this moment is upon us, I might as well help you and sow a bit of goodwill." Laughing, he waved his finger and the butterfly trembled. Unexpectedly, ripples spread out from its wings into the starry sky, and a timeshift magic appeared. The trembling of the butterfly seemed to push the starry sky to the point where it might shatter, as if it had been building up with power that was about to explode, and if it did, would unleash shocking speed that could break free of all obstructions. A timeshift magic appeared around the green-colored entity, and it seemed to Meng Hao that from the moment he had looked at him, time had been flowing differently around him. Apparently, he did not come from this time period, and had in fact used the strange fluctuations of time in the area to come to this point. As the figure grew more and more blurry, Meng Hao suddenly asked, "Who are you?" "You don't know me, and maybe you never will." Laughter continued to ring out as the green-colored entity vanished without a trace. The only thing that remained behind was his voice, which seemed to contain a tone of relief as it echoed out into the vast expanse. "Who created the white pearl? Who created the black pearl?" 1. About the white pearl and black pearl. To be perfectly honest, I ran out of time to thoroughly investigate this, so what I'm about to say should be taken with a grain of salt. Long story short is that I saw some stuff online about these pearls being references to pearls which appear in Renegade, Immortal, and Beseech the Devil, respectively. I did a bit of digging but couldn't come up with anything conclusive about the subject. This is not the type of thing I can escalate to Urgen, so for now, take this info as it is. If I get more conclusive info, I'll share it later. Who carved out the 4 great realms? Who turned the starry sky into the vast expanse? 1. Spoiler information to follow. The 4 great realms were mentioned in previous novels. Apparently, one of them is the place where Wang Lin existed, and another is where Su Ming existed. And who created that mirror? Who gave up the immortal to become the ghost? He was the beginning, you are the end, so that's how it is. Immortal, God, devil, demon, ghost, I get it now. Chapter 1404. Immortal, God, demon, devil, ghost. /expand. As the sound of his voice faded away, Meng Hao's heart trembled. At the same time, the butterfly exploded out from within the timeshift magic. It was as if enormous energy had built up, the eruption of which destroyed the whole area in exchange for a blessing of time, resulting in an incredible burst of speed. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the butterfly shot forward with indescribable speed, speeding across the starry sky to appear directly above the vortex that Paragon Sea Dream had determined contained hope for the realm. The butterfly was right there, over the very center of the vortex, at the source of all its power. The power of the vortex caused Meng Hao's demonic qi to scatter, instantly revealing the butterfly to the tracking magics of the immortal god continent and the devil realm. Because of that sudden surge of energy, the immortal god continent and the devil realm both began to vibrate, and ghost images popped up around them as teleportation power was unleashed. Then, they vanished. Meng Hao's mind trembled as the timeshift magic raged around the butterfly, pushing it inexorably downward toward the wild tempest that was the vortex. When you compared the butterfly to the vortex itself, it was completely minuscule. The sight caused Meng Hao's pupils to constrict. As he stood there on the butterfly's back, he couldn't stop thinking about the words spoken just now by the green-colored entity. However, there was little time to contemplate the matter deeply. Lightning crackled endlessly within the mad tempest of the vortex that drew ever nearer. Down below, at the center of the vortex, was what appeared to be a black hole filled with infinite rifts, within each of which was another world. At the most inward depths of the black hole was a green-colored coffin. When added to the black and white color that made up the vortex, that green made the entire thing three colors. Although it seemed as though the coffin wasn't very far off, the truth was that after entering the vortex, it was still an incredible, even immeasurable distance away. The enemy forces will be here at any moment, Meng Hao thought, eyes flickering. He poured his cultivation base into the butterfly, and as its wings flapped, it headed into the vortex. It was in that very moment that, not too far off in the distance, the void rippled, and then a huge rift silently opened up. What came out was not the immortal god continent, but instead, a roiling black fog. As the fog spread out, a land mass that was just as large as the immortal god continent appeared, emanating a tremendous pressure. Leading the land mass were several brightly colored butterflies. As for the continent itself, a huge coffin could be seen there, surrounded by countless cultivators prostrated in worship. Slowly, those cultivators began to look up, to peer out of the land mass, toward Meng Hao and the butterfly. The Devil Realm continent, Meng Hao said, his heart sinking. Before another moment could pass, the void in the other direction ripped open, and the immortal god continent appeared. Boundless killing intent locked down onto Meng Hao, as well as the butterfly. An incredible crisis was developing, for Meng Hao, for the butterfly, and for the living beings of the mountain and sea realm. Countless cultivators began to pour off of the immortal god continent, and leading them all were the same people who Meng Hao had tangled with before, the 4 essences paragons. This time, you won't get away. As that happened, a cold snort echoed out from the Devil Realm continent as a rugged-looking man appeared, leading a vast, endless group of Devil Realm continent cultivators. There were also 3 beams of light that shot out, emanating energy that could shake heaven and earth. Meng Hao even caught sight of a giant rising up on the land mass, whose aura contained a matchless, domineering air. Meng Hao sank further into silence as he saw the seemingly infinite hordes of cultivators. The sight of that, coupled with the 2 vast land masses, was a huge weight crushing down onto his heart. Meng Hao looked up at the vast army of cultivators and then spoke out in a loud voice. "Why? What do you people want? You want to stop the immortal from appearing? Well, there is no immortal anymore. You want that certain object? Well, I have it right here. I'll stay behind. Let the mountain and sea realm cultivators go." The one to answer Meng Hao was the cold female paragon, who said there's no immortal. As long as the bloodlines of the mountain and sea cultivators remain unsealed, the foundation for the immortal will always exist. As for that object, of course we know that you have it. Based on her biting words, it seemed she wasn't interested in any sort of discussion with Meng Hao. Waving her hand, she shot forward at top speed, followed by the 3 other old men. Even as they closed in, the muscular man from the Devil Realm continent looked on with flashing eyes. It only took him a moment to put the pieces together regarding what had already occurred, and then he also began to advance on Meng Hao. Rumbling sounds echoed out as numerous powerful experts and countless other cultivators charged toward Meng Hao. They were like a tidal wave, backed with destructive power that could destroy anything and everything. Meng Hao's face fell and he gritted his teeth. Then, he reached out and shoved the butterfly, imbuing it with power to give it a bit more speed. As it shot toward the black hole in the center of the vortex, Meng Hao unhesitatingly stepped off of its back, hovering there alone to face the incoming forces of both of the 2 great powers. Back on the butterfly, Su Qing wept, and Kesidigarbha stood there with hands clenched into fists. Fatty cried out in anger, and everyone else was trembling. These were people who had watched Shui Dongliu die, had watched Paragon See Dream die, and now, they were watching Meng Hao do the same thing that Shui Dongliu had. He was standing there alone to protect them. "Stay alive," Meng Hao said. "I'm not going to die, and one day I'll come back for all of you. My family, my beloved, my clan, my friends, my mountain and sea realm." Roaring, Meng Hao lifted his right hand up and then hit the top of his head. Instantly, the precious treasure that was the mountain and sea realm appeared. Rumbling echoed out as the mountain and sea realm grand aegis appeared, covering the entire area. Meng Hao's hair whipped about him as his energy rocketed up. Demonic chi swirled around him as he single-handedly began to fight against the enemy. It was all to buy time for the butterfly which bore the weight of all the cultivators of the mountain and sea realm into the black hole that Paragon Sea Dream had indicated, was where hope lay. Die! Meng Hao threw his head back and roared. His eyes were bright red, and directly behind him could be seen the enormous image of a demon, also roaring. In the blink of an eye, Meng Hao slammed into the cold woman from the immortal god continent. A boom could be heard as blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, and yet he lunged out in a headbutt. The cold woman's face fell and she fell back, yet in that very same moment, Meng Hao's right hand made a grasping motion and the battle weapon appeared. Within was the parrot, silent and taciturn. Although the parrot hadn't spoken out loud for a long time, there it was in the battle weapon, looking almost berserk. The meat jelly appeared and transformed into a suit of armor. At the same time, the mastiff roared, becoming a bright red cape. The armor was white, and the battle weapon radiated madness. The image of the demon had bright red eyes, and as Meng Hao hovered there with hair whipping around him, a murderous air swirled around him. As he clashed with the hosts from the immortal god continent, the battle weapon wreaked havoc with every swipe and slash. Then, the rugged, muscular man from the Devil Realm continent began to walk forward. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. He took a total of 7 steps, and with each step, his energy rose higher and higher. He was like some sort of battle deity, roaring as he closed in on Meng Hao with a fist strike. 7 god steps, he roared. Meng Hao spun, clenching his left hand into a fist to unleash the god-slaying fist. A massive blast surged out in all directions when they met. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, and as for the muscular man, he also retreated, blood oozing out of his mouth. He was just about to close in for another attack when he realized that Meng Hao had spun around and was attacking the immortal god continent forces. The man frowned, then gave a cold snort. Next, the forces of the Devil Realm continent surged forward, joining in with the immortal god continent's forces to attack Meng Hao. Chaotic battle instantly erupted. Meng Hao left swaths of death wherever he passed. He moved with incredible speed, his aura changing constantly. One moment it would be domineering, the next, brutal. He grabbed an immortal god cultivator and viciously absorbed him. Now that he had become a demon, the blood demon grand magic was even more explosively powerful and efficient. The lightning cauldron appeared, and he quickly teleported to another location, where a large group of cultivators was pursuing the butterfly. A vicious expression could be seen on Meng Hao's face as he waved his sleeve, causing the cultivators to cough up mouthfuls of blood. Some were even instantly killed and transformed into ash. Meng Hao was already soaked in blood, but he was laughing, a laughter filled with madness and a desire for slaughter. From the moment the butterfly had begun its true flight into the vortex, until now, only a few dozen breaths of time had passed. However, during that time, Meng Hao had single-handedly locked down the entire enemy force, ensuring that the butterfly could draw ever closer to the black hole. "Are you looking to die?" roared the cold woman from the immortal god continent. Her murderous aura swirled, and as she closed in on Meng Hao, she was joined by her 3 fellow Nine Essences compatriots. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with red light. Without any hesitation, he waved his right hand, causing numerous mountains to descend. Essence magic was also unleashed as he fought back. At the same time, the 3 old men advanced, clearly not aiming for Meng Hao, but rather the butterfly. However, even as they attempted to pass by Meng Hao, he laughed loudly, and then waved his right arm with violent force. The void trembled and everything shook. The Paragon Bridge appeared, provoking immediate reactions from the cold woman and her 3 companions. Mixed emotions could be seen on their faces, but they didn't pause for even a moment. Meng Hao began to laugh loudly. "Now I will wipe out my Paragon Bridge from my Tao for all eternity. Detonate." Meng Hao's laughter echoed out as the Paragon Bridge trembled. Cracks spread out across its surface, unleashing blinding light. Then, the bridge exploded. Chapter 1405, Wiping the Paragon Bridge from the Tao.